The subcommittee will come to order. The chair recognizes himself for an opening statement. Good morning, and welcome to today's oversight hearing of the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, or NTIA. I want to welcome Administrator Arielle Roth back to the Energy and Commerce Committee. Administrator Roth was once a detailee here at ENC. We'd love to see our alumni come move on to important roles in the administration, and you certainly have done us proud. NTIA serves as the President's principal advisor on telecommunication issues. This includes issues like broadband deployment, managing federal spectrum use, international telecommunications policies, advanced communications research, and strengthening public safety communications. Much of NTIA's focus over the last year has been on the $42.45 billion Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, or BEAD program. This program aims to connect the remaining unserved and underserved Americans to broadband. The Biden administration ran this program for 3 years, but burdened it with onerous regulations that created only confusion and delays. The result, in 3 years, they only approved 3 state proposals and 0 homes were connected to broadband. Last June, the Trump NTIA restructured BEAD, removing many of the Biden administration burdens. They eliminated technology preference, unlawful rate regulation of broadband plans, and unnecessary labor, DEI, and climate requirements. I proposed a similar approach in my Speed for BEAD legislation, and I'm thrilled that NTIA implemented many of my ideas. In the 1 year since reforming BEAD, this administration got each state to run a new bidding round that saved taxpayers billions of dollars, approved 54 final proposals, and saw homes in 2 states get connected to broadband. That is the speed we need. Administrator Roth and her team have done incredible work to save taxpayer dollars. Look no further than their work in D.C. Rather than rubber stamping D.C.'s BEAD proposal, Administrator Roth and her team traveled around the district to see the places where D.C. wanted to use BEAD funds. They found D.C. wanted to spend $70,000 per location to connect a field house, a construction trailer, a gated Pepco electric utility building, a shed along Amtrak train tracks, a non-existent building along the same Amtrak train tracks, and an open field off the GW Parkway. Locations that we can all agree do not need broadband. Following this work, DC confirmed that they had 0 unserved or underserved locations that needed funding. I applaud NTIA's work in rooting out waste and generating real savings in this program. NTIA's BEAD reforms have saved over $20 billion for the American taxpayers. Now we must consider what to do with the non-deployment money. Although the infrastructure law outlines some uses, NTIA still maintains significant discretion on how states can use this money. I have made no secret that I believe some of this money should be used to deploy next-generation 911 nationwide. Deploying this internet protocol-based system at our 911 call centers will open the door to advanced tools for both the public and our first responders, directly supporting the intent of the infrastructure law. I know many members of this committee have their own ideas for how we should use this money, including supporting telecommunications workforce development programs and permitting efforts. I hope today's hearing will shed light on how NTIA is planning to use these funds. NTIA also plays an important role in public safety communications. It supports the nation's public safety agencies in their adoption and implementation of advanced communication technologies, including NG911. It also supports the First Responder Network Authority, the independent authority that oversees the nationwide public safety broadband network. I appreciate Administrator Roth visiting my district last year to see how FirstNet is serving the public safety community in Alamance County. As many of you know, the House recently passed the First Responder Network Authority Reauthorization Act, reauthorizing FirstNet until September 2037 and implementing several essential reforms, including bringing the authority directly under NTIA. We now await Senate action on this important legislation. I want to thank NTIA for working with us on this legislation. Thank you to Administrator Roth for being here today, and I really look forward to our discussion. I now recognize the ranking member, the gentlelady from California, for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm glad we're holding this oversight hearing on NTIA. This agency oversees tens of billions of dollars in federal broadband funding. The American people deserve answers about why the Trump administration spent the last 18 months delaying broadband build-out and canceling funding for states and local communities, all while pressuring them to give up affordability and consumer protections. Reliable, affordable, high-speed internet is no longer a luxury. It's how our children can learn, how patients access telehealth, how small businesses compete, and how families stay connected. That is why Congress passed the bipartisan infrastructure law and invested $65 billion to close the digital divide, including more than $42 billion through the BEAD program. Congress made a promise to connect every community with affordable, reliable broadband. Instead of carrying out the promise, the Trump administration has spent the last 18 months gutting it. NTIA has repeatedly moved the goalposts, missed its own deadlines, and created uncertainty for states, providers, and the communities waiting to get connected. Today, we see the consequences. Providers are walking away. States are being forced to revisit decisions they already made. Communities that thought help was finally on the way are once again left wondering again when or if they'll ever get connected. California has worked in good faith to meet these shifting demands, but we're still stuck waiting on NTI's final sign-off before we can get shovels in the ground. From Sacramento to San Joaquin and the El Dorado Hills, families are now waiting well into next year while the Trump administration keeps changing the rules. Even more troubling, NTIA is still sitting on more than $20 billion in BEAD non-deployment funding. Congress provided those funds because closing the digital divide requires more than laying fiber in the ground or launching satellites into space. It also requires making sure people can afford to get online and have the skills and support to use that connection. Yet, months after missing its own deadlines, NTIA still has not told states if or how they can use these funds, leaving states in limbo and families behind. I'm equally concerned that in other areas, NTIA is also exceeding the authority that Congress gave it. Congress never directed NTIA to override state affordability policies, disregard their net neutrality laws, or discourage states from negotiating stronger contract provisions to protect consumers. And Congress certainly never authorized NTIA to override state AI laws. Yet President Trump is threatening to withhold billions in broadband funding if he doesn't like their AI protection. The administration also illegally canceled nearly $3 billion in digital equity funds, including $70 million that's going to help California families. That decision stopped their proposed project that would have helped more than 500,000 digitally disadvantaged Californian households gain affordable broadband access, digital skills training, and the devices they need to participate in today's economy. Across 50 California counties, including the Sacramento regions, seniors, veterans, students, people with disabilities, and low-income families are left behind because President Trump didn't like a program Congress specifically created to help them. Today, I'm concerned we'll hear NTIA continue to dodge accountability, offer vague answers, shift blame, and exceed the authority Congress gave it. But the American people deserve clear answers. When will states receive certainty about funding? What legal authority does NTIA believe it has to impose requirements Congress never enacted? And when will states finally be allowed to finish the work Congress directed them to do? Congress passed a bipartisan law. NTIA's job is to follow it, not rewrite it. Lastly, we must continue leading the world in spectrum policy, which powers the devices and services Americans depend on to work, learn, and stay safe. And that's why the U.S. government must speak with one voice at next year's World Radio Communications Conference. I urge and encourage NTIA to hold a Spectrum Summit to ensure that the U.S. has a united front with their strategic allies. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize the chairman of the full committee, the gentleman from Kentucky, for 5 minutes for his opening statement.
Thanks, Chairman Hudson. Thanks for holding a supporting hearing today, and I thank Administrator Roth for being here. Welcome to the committee, back to the committee. The National Telecommunications Information Administration plays a critical role in ensuring every American has access to connectivity, and that the United States continues to lead the world and technological information. I'm sure Chairman Hudson, I know he spoke a lot about BEAD, and I'm sure you mentioned that it took 3 years of the Biden administration to not get a penny out. I'm sure you brought that up when we were talking about delays. But anyway, I won't focus on that. I'm going to focus on the work you're doing on Spectrum. My good friend, the ranking member of this subcommittee, and I have worked very closely together and very long hours on Spectrum, so I appreciate being here together with her. So one of the important roles NTIA plays is managing the use of federal spectrum. As demand for 5G, 6G, Wi-Fi, and AI continue to grow, we need to make sure spectrum is available for private use sector. The Working Families Tax Cut directed NTIA in coordination with the FCC to identify 500 megahertz of federal spectrum for reallocation for commercial use. I am pleased to hear that NTIA has already begun identifying bands for reallocation and studying other important mid-band spectrum bands. I hope NTIA can move quickly to get these bands to auction. This is crucial to maintaining United States leadership in wireless innovation. NTIA also plays an essential role in representing the United States in the international telecommunications discussion, including this year's I2A meeting and next year's World Radio Communications Conference. We have our work cut out for us. It's in China. I don't know who decided to locate that in China, but it is. And I know we're going to have all hands on deck and working together. I look forward to hearing from Administrator Roth about our preparations for these two important events. American leadership globally is key. Otherwise, the next generation of technology would be dominated by adversaries who do not share our values and who cannot allow them to set standards to drive innovation and reap the economic benefits of that should be ours. As I say that, as I always say, we're not competing with Europe to regulate, we're competing with China to innovate. We, as we did yesterday, protect our children from purveyors through social media, but we also need to make sure that we have in place what's been really interesting to watch, and I've talked about Europe quite a bit and have that example of what not to do, as European teams are staying in not just in our cities, which we have. I put our cities up against any city in the world, but particularly in our suburbs. I was just in Chattanooga at a wedding, and the Spanish team is staying in the city of Chattanooga, and they're just seeing that American prosperity is throughout the country. It's amazing how they look at the way everyday middle-class Americans live, and they can't believe we have the standard of living that we have. I think that's been a great outcome from what we've seen of hosting the world in the United States, because people in the world can see they can live the same way we live if they have the right innovation and the right policies in place. So, as I always said, we have twice the economy of Europe, where we had equivalent-sized economies in 2007. So it's important that we maintain our leadership so we continue to grow and raise the standard of living, not just for the people running the companies, but the people who are working for the companies and benefiting from the efficiencies that come from these companies. And we appreciate that, and I will yield back.
Thank you, Chairman. I now recognize the gentleman from New Jersey, the ranking member, for 5 minutes for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Hudson. The National Telecommunication and Information Administration, NTIA, plays a critical role in planning and coordinating U.S. communications strategy at home and abroad, expanding Internet access and connectivity, and improving public safety communications. And as the President's principal advisor for telecommunications policy, the NTIA administrator is responsible for leading an agency charged with ensuring Americans continue to have reliable access to communications capabilities. The BEAD program was established and funded as part of the bipartisan infrastructure law in 2021 to provide a generational investment in broadband infrastructure for unserved and underserved communities across the country. And for decades, we've heard countless stories about how pervasive the digital divide has become, especially in rural communities. And that's why passing that law was a victory not just for red states or blue states, but for all communities lacking internet access. And this program was meant to address that inequity with state-of-the-art investments that would last for multiple decades. Unfortunately, the Trump NTIA has strayed far from that mission since January of 2025. Despite pushback from both Republicans and Democrats at all levels of government, the Trump NTIA is barreling ahead with its shady restructuring of the BEAD program while impounding billions of taxpayers' dollars in grant funds across a number of programs authorized and appropriated by Congress. Commerce Secretary Lutnick and NTIA Administrator Roth have repeatedly violated the law and defied congressional intent in a manner that is increasing the cost of Internet service and, I fear, opening the door to waste, fraud, and abuse. Hidden behind the veil they call the benefit of the bargain, the Trump administration forced states to throw out their broadband plans and bullied state broadband offices into awarding as many locations as possible to Elon Musk's SpaceX on the basis that it is the cheapest option. It's not the best option or the right option, but the cheapest option. When it comes to critical infrastructure like bridges or pipelines, and yes, broadband, Americans just want the job done right. Even then, low Earth orbit LEO broadband solutions like Musk's Starlink are only cheaper than the alternatives if you do not factor in each technology's lifespan and cost over time. And let me be clear, satellite connectivity is an important component of the broader communication ecosystem, but NTIA's changes to the BEAD program ignore the fact that Starlink is already accessible to the public. Although prohibitively expensive for many Americans, any household or business currently lacking internet access could sign up today without one dime of taxpayer money. At the end of the day, all NTIA has done is secure hundreds of thousands of locations where satellite is now the lone monopoly provider, robbing consumers of choice and competition that are fundamental to making service affordable to middle-class families. By taking thousands of miles of fiber off the map, the Trump administration has unnecessarily condemned vast swaths of rural America to the connectivity equivalent of a Band-Aid, ignoring the spirit and intent of this generational infrastructure investment. To make matters worse, NTIA has yet to demonstrate with any certainty that LEO providers will meet and sustain the statutorily required performance metrics at scale. And the Trump administration is also failing to enforce the statutory requirement of the law that BEAD grantees offer a low-cost service option that is truly affordable to qualifying consumers. This is yet another example of the Trump administration driving up everyday costs on hardworking American families. It's bad enough costs are skyrocketing as a result of Trump's reckless tariffs and his reckless war of choice with Iran, but now his administration is defying the law and refusing to ensure consumers have access to low-cost service options for their internet service as the law intended. While households are finally being connected under BEAD, the Trump administration's inexcusable revamping of the program not only stopped getting shovels in the ground, but it's also increased costs. And now we're seeing broadband providers leave the BEAD program and surrender their awards one after another, not because of decisions made by the states, but because of moving goalposts and mismanagement from NTIA. To minimize the damage already done, NTIA must immediately deliver each state's non-deployment funds with maximum flexibility for their use, consistent with the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act. And time is literally running out to put these dollars to good use, and the delays have gone on long enough. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. We have now concluded with member opening statements. The chair reminds members that pursuant to committee rules, all members' opening statements will be made part of the record. I'd like to thank our witness for being here today to testify before the subcommittee. Our witness will have 5 minutes to provide an opening statement, which will be followed by a round of questions from members. The witness here today before us is the Honorable Arielle Roth, Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Communications and Information and Administrator, National Telecommunications and Information Administration. Welcome, Administrator Roth. Also, on behalf of the committee, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to your husband, Yakov, and your parents, Mark and Peggy. I know they're proud, and we're very happy to have you with us here today. We extend our welcome. Administrator Roth, you're recognized for 5 minutes for your opening statement. Make sure your mic's on there. I do that all the time, too.
Okay. Chairman Hudson, Ranking Member Matsui, and members of the subcommittee, it's great to be back, and thank you for the opportunity to testify today. It's been nearly a year since I was confirmed to lead NTIA, and I am grateful for the opportunity to work alongside the dedicated public servants at the agency to advance an ambitious agenda, developing the largest spectrum pipeline in our nation's history, ensuring nationwide broadband availability, strengthening public safety communications, and promoting American leadership in the technologies of the future. It's especially meaningful to appear before you just days before our nation celebrates its 250th anniversary. Throughout our history, breakthroughs in communications have helped expand opportunity, accelerate the exchange of ideas, and strengthen American prosperity. From the telegraph to the telephone to wireless, satellite, the internet, and now AI, America has repeatedly led the technologies that shape the modern world. At NTIA, our responsibility is to ensure that the next generation of communications technologies continues that tradition by removing obstacles to innovation, expanding opportunity, and strengthening American leadership. Consistent with the Working Families Tax Cut Act and President Trump's memorandum establishing U.S. leadership in 6G as a national priority, NTIA is moving aggressively to identify at least 500 megahertz of spectrum for commercial use. Thanks to our progress across the 7 gigahertz, 2.7 gigahertz, 4 gigahertz, and 1.675 gigahertz bands, we are on track to meet that target ahead of our statutory deadline. To support transparency and accountability, NTIA recently launched spectrum.gov so that Congress, industry, and the public can track progress in real time. NTIA is strengthening engagement in international standards bodies, preparing aggressively for the 2027 World Radio Communication Conference, supporting American leadership at the ITU, and helping ensure next-generation networks are built on secure and resilient technologies rather than standards shaped by authoritarian regimes. Another major priority has been reforming the BEAD program. When this administration took office, BEAD was weighed down by unnecessary red tape, market-distorting restrictions, and requirements that exceeded the statute. Under Secretary Lutnick's leadership, we restored the program's focus to its core mission, connecting Americans through competition, accountability, and respect for the law. By embracing technology neutrality, encouraging meaningful private investment, and focusing on fiscal discipline, NTIA's benefit of the bargain reforms have produced more than $21 billion in savings while expediting deployment. Today, nearly every state and territory has received approval of its final proposal, and Americans are already being connected through the reform program. NTIA is also working to improve connectivity in tribal communities through reforms to our tribal broadband connectivity and native entity programs that reduce administrative burdens and maximize the impact of federal dollars. Public safety communications remain another core priority. NTIA applauds this committee's leadership on FirstNet reauthorization and the bipartisan efforts to strengthen governance and accountability for the network. Thanks to NTIA's enhanced oversight of FirstNet, Secretary Lutnick was able to secure an additional $2 billion in value under the contract, enabling further expansion of coverage and connectivity for first responders. In addition, NTIA continues to support this committee's bipartisan efforts on Next Generation 911, including through our recently released study providing updated data on nationwide implementation costs. Finally, I want to mention NTIA's work on excessive screen time in schools. As a mother of 6, this issue is deeply personal to me. Technology has a role in education, but it should support learning, not replace the reading, writing, critical thinking, and face-to-face interaction children need to thrive. As parents have become increasingly concerned about the amount of screen-based instruction their children receive during the school day, NTIA has convened parents, teachers, researchers, and our partners across this administration to ensure federal policies put children's learning and healthy development first. NTIA is delivering results across our core missions. As our nation marks 250 years of freedom, innovation, and ingenuity, we remain committed to advancing policies that remove barriers, unleash private sector innovation, and help ensure America leads the next technology frontier. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. We'll now begin questioning, and I recognize myself for 5 minutes. Administrator Roth, let's jump right in. When can we expect guidance on how states can use remaining BEAD non-deployment funds?
No, I understand that everyone and the members of the committee in particular are very focused on this question. NTIA is extremely outcome-driven. We saw those results through our management of the BEAD program. We inherited a program that had been weighed down, and we course-corrected it and saw incredible outcomes, both in terms of taxpayer savings, faster deployment, and universal connectivity. And we want to see the same effective outcomes when it comes to the remaining funding that states have worked so hard to produce. We want the funding to produce real measurable outcomes, be non-duplicative, non-distortionary, and I think we're really focused on getting the funding right. We've received a tremendous amount of interest and comments on how the funding should be used, and we're proceeding cautiously in producing the guidance so that we can ensure that this funding achieves the same success as the first segment of the BEAD program. And we plan to release guidance this summer.
Well, I appreciate that answer, and I think your track record on the BEAD program writ large it was excellent, and so that at least in my case creates some trust that you will handle this appropriately and correctly. But obviously, we want to make sure these funds are used. But to your point, we want to make sure they're used correctly and effectively, so they actually reach real people out there. So I appreciate the care with what you're using, but we want to work with you to get this done as quickly as we can. You and I have talked many times. I'm a strong supporter of Next Gen 911, and I've called for upgrading across the country to NG 911. And we are having conversations across the aisle here to try to come to some bipartisan consensus on this issue. But I have said that I think some of these non-deployment funds could be used to fund this NG 911 upgrade. Will you take this into consideration as you're making your plans with this money?
Absolutely. It was one of the recommendations that we saw when we held public listening sessions on the use of the funds. And I thank you for your leadership on this issue. Chairman Hudson, I should have mentioned that I really enjoyed working with you on public safety communications ever since my second day on the job, visiting your district in Alamance County for a FirstNet groundbreaking. And NTIA has sought to provide helpful information to this committee on Next Generation 911 and applaud your efforts on this issue through our recently updated study. I've personally visited several 911 centers, most recently in Fairfax County during Public Safety Telecommunicators Week, and it's just very clear that ensuring that we see upgrades to modern IP-based technologies are critical for better response times, better location tracking, and triage of calls. So looking forward to, appreciate the opportunity to work with you and the committee on this issue, on your bipartisan efforts on this issue.
I appreciate that. And I should have mentioned the study you did on the cost was crucial, and you moved very quickly on that, and that really gives us the facts we need, I think, to move forward with this program. So thank you for that. Going back to BEAD program writ large, I understand that some providers have rejected their awards and have backed out of the program. What is NTIA doing to ensure that homes and businesses these providers were supposed to serve ultimately receive service?
Thank you for the question. So our goal is to see universal, ubiquitous connectivity through BEAD. That's the law, and we're achieving that. To level set, we have seen some changes in the BEAD program. I think that's to be expected in a program of this size. We've only seen about 1% of BEAD locations affected by changes, but the good news is that we planned and we have a process in place to ensure that areas that are subject to changes get served. And we've successfully backfilled in about a dozen states where that's occurred. And we're eager to ensure ubiquitous connectivity. And there are multiple reasons for why a provider would back out, but ultimately we're ensuring that providers that can deliver on their obligations are participating in the program.
That's great to hear. So the folks who may be backing out represent about 1% of the coverage, and you've been able to successfully backfill those cases.
That's right.
That's great. Thank you for that. My time has expired. I will now recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes for her questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Administrator Roth. NTIA doesn't have the authority to regulate broadband rates and force states to give up their consumer protections. Yet NTI is instructing companies receiving federal broadband dollars to insist that states include contract terms exempting these companies from state consumer protections like affordability and net neutrality. Administrator Roth, you've said, and I'm quoting from your October 2025 Hudson Institute remarks, any state receiving BEAD funds must exempt BEAD providers throughout their state footprint from broadband-specific economic regulations, such as price regulation and net neutrality. California has strong consumer protections, including our own net neutrality law, and has long negotiated stronger broadband contracts to protect consumers. Yes or no, should California lose broadband funding because it wants stronger consumer protections than what NTIA requires?
No, we believe that every state, including California, should get access to broadband through the BEAD program. Our job is to implement the law, and the law specifically tells us to ensure the timely and effective deployment of broadband projects through the BEAD program. And we know that one of the challenges of deploying broadband is an inhospitable regulatory environment. We want to ensure that the program's successful, that these projects are successful, they're not subject to defaults, and so we're doing our job by ensuring that the states do their part to provide that regulatory environment.
What specific authority did Congress give NTIA to require California to suspend or limit enforcement of its own consumer protection laws? Not just for BEAD-funded networks, but for companies' broadband operations throughout the state.
The law requires NTIA to provide rules and guidelines on the effective deployment of broadband through the BEAD program. We know, and history has shown, that government price regulation undermines incentives to invest, particularly in rural areas where deployment is already challenging. And so regulations that are hostile to that investment, as we saw, under the previous rules, providers stayed away precisely because of hostile rate regulation mandates. We don't want to see that mistake happen.
I'm asking where Congress specifically authorized an NTIA to affect legal rights and obligations outside the scope of the BEAD-funded project.
Yeah, no, we are not preempting any state laws. What we are saying is that states have to, with respect to BEAD projects, because our mandate and our jurisdiction is BEAD projects need to be protected from regulations that undermine the success of the BEAD program and BEAD projects.
So you're saying that NTIA can actually tell them to just forget about any consumer protections, in this case in the state?
No, we support consumer protections. I think that our focus is on rate regulation. We're motivated, or we're driven by evidence and data. A bipartisan Congress recognized or actually precluded NTIA from rate regulating in the BEAD program precisely because of data showing that rate regulation harms investment. We don't want to jeopardize the success of BEAD projects, and so therefore we've entered into agreements with the states where they've promised to ensure a healthy regulatory environment so that these projects can be successful.
Okay, well, I think I'm going to have to follow up with you later on that. Congress passed a bipartisan infrastructure law to connect Americans to affordable, reliable broadband. It did not condition broadband funding on whether a state regulates AI. Yet the Trump AI executive order directs NTIA to withhold broadband funding from states with so-called onerous AI laws. California has led the nation on both broadband and responsible AI. It shouldn't have to choose between protecting consumers and receiving broadband funding. That's why I co-authored the Guardrails Act to repeal this dangerous executive order. Now, Administrator Roth, yes or no, can an executive order rewrite law?
I serve the president and I implement the law, and those two things are not in conflict. Executive orders are lawful direction to executive branch agencies.
So what specific provision in the bipartisan infrastructure law authorizes NTI to condition BEAD funding on a state's AI laws?
So no final decision on the report has been made. I'm not going to prejudge outcomes before we've completed our review. What I can say is that our report, the report will comply with the law. I think that it's also important to keep in mind as we've seen, there's and as the executive order shows, there's a symbiotic, I'm sorry, I'm out of time.
You can complete your answer.
Yeah, a symbiotic relationship between broadband deployment and AI. AI is how broadband is how consumers get AI, and AI is increasingly becoming embedded in broadband network architecture. So I think, it's per our mandate to ensure timely and effective deployment of broadband, it's important that the regulatory environment reflect those outcomes.
I'd like to follow up with questions. Okay, thank you.
Great. Gentlelady's time has expired. Chair now recognizes the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Guthrie, for 5 minutes for his questions.
Thank you. Thank you for being here, Administrator Roth. As I mentioned in my opening statement, the Working Family Tax Cut directed NTIA to identify 500 megahertz of federal spectrum for allocation for commercial. I understand that some bands have already been identified for commercial use and that studies are underway on others. How quickly can these studies be completed from there? And how quickly can we expect these bands to be ready for auction?
Thank you, Chairman Guthrie, and it was great to meet with you. As I started my role as NTIA administrator, thank you for your leadership and the committee's leadership on spectrum. Getting more spectrum into the marketplace is a core priority of this administration, and we're working aggressively to meet the mandate set out for us in the Working Families Tax Cut Act. We are on track not only to meet that mandate, but beat it thanks to the president's leadership in the winning the 6G race presidential memorandum. And we're going to identify spectrum in the 7 gigahertz band ahead of schedule by the end of this year. And we're at NTIA, we're extremely focused on this mission. We're working on 4 studies at once, which is unprecedented. And so we're working with the FCC and other federal partners to get spectrum studied and identified as quickly as possible so that we can meet Chairman Carr's goal of 5 auctions during this administration.
I was going to ask how we could help you speed this up. It sounds like you're in the express lane already getting this done. Huh? Is there things we could help you with to get it done faster, or do you feel like you're pretty comfortable the way that it's going?
We're working very fast. We were able to secure funding in the 2.7 gigahertz band in half the time it took the previous administration. But at the same time, what we're working on and how we can get spectrum identified is through the Spectrum Relocation Fund process, which is really essential to ensure that we have the certainty over what we're auctioning and under what parameters, so that an auction can be successful.
So let me follow up. So a major component of reallocating spectrum from federal to non-federal use is the Spectrum Reallocation Fund. We've heard that there can be barriers to agencies utilizing these funds, ultimately delaying new spectrum getting in the hands of commercial users. What can Congress do to reform the Spectrum Relocation Fund so that it can be better used as an incentive to encourage federal agencies to relocate?
So, we would defer to Congress, and we will abide by the law in the SRF.
Do you have suggestions of how we can improve it? Do you have suggestions for how we can improve it?
So one of the things that we've seen is that some of the timelines perhaps could be truncated to get funding to the agencies more quickly and enable us to complete our studies quicker. One timeline that the committee could consider would be the 60-day congressional notification timeline. There's also a 6-month congressional notification timeline for transition funding. So we'd be happy to work with you and the committee on finding ways to expedite this process and get funding, enables agencies to secure funding more expeditiously.
So thanks. So now for the World Radio Communication Conference that takes place next year, obviously, in China. So it's critical that we go there strong with a unified position. And so can you discuss the status of the preparation for the World Radio Conference 27 and our ability to develop a unified position on different agenda items? So how's the preparation going? Where are we? And can we have a unified position?
This is a core focus of this administration. We're working aggressively with our interagency partners to get our positions identified well ahead of WRC so that we can build an international a coalition of like-minded partners and build support for those positions. One of the ways NTIA did that was by holding a training in Ghana with 27 key regulators from 20 different African countries. The agenda at WRC is going to be very satellite heavy, and so we worked with those regulators to promote U.S. Commercial space interests, which is a very important area strategically for us. And
What kind of extra considerations do you have to give, given that it's in China?
Yeah, so one of the things that we need to do is ensure effective leadership at the ITU. The Plenipotentiary Conference, where upcoming elections are happening, is this November, and so we're working to ensure that Doreen Bogdan-Martin wins her election as Secretary General of the ITU, as well as the U.S. Wins in its other elections. Effective leadership is important to ensure that we can promote our interests in an effective way at WRC without surveillance or interference. That was an issue I spoke about at ITU Council in Geneva in May.
Thanks. Well, my time has expired, so thank you for your answers, and I yield back.
Thank you, Chairman. I now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Pallone, for 5 minutes for your questions.
Thank you. And as I've mentioned, I have serious concerns that your tenure as NTIA administrator has shown a pattern of decision-making ranging from irresponsible to outright unlawful. And the common thread that ties it all together is a dereliction of your duty to prevent waste, fraud, and abuse of taxpayer dollars. For instance, the bipartisan infrastructure law specifically prioritizes broadband technologies in the BEAD program that are the most reliable, scalable, and future-proof, meaning that they will not become outdated or obsolete in the near future, but instead, you force states to prioritize the cheapest bids, regardless of a technology's scalability or longevity. And it's difficult to ignore the growing list of similarities between your new BEAD program and the failed Trump Rural Digital Opportunity Fund program. Both incentivize a race to the bottom, fraught with numerous provider defaults, and open the door to waste, fraud, and abuse. And worse, by imposing arbitrary per-location price caps, you failed to accurately reflect the actual cost to serve the rural, low-density locations that are the specific target of the BEAD program. And the decision to ignore the law has redirected valuable funding away from infrastructure that would last for decades to subsidies instead for Elon Musk's satellite service, which we know faces affordability, reliability, and spectrum capacity constraints, and is widely more expensive for customers in the long run. Yet you have issued no guidance on how they're supposed to ensure that SpaceX does, in fact, have the capacity to serve every location they've been awarded. So let me ask Administrator Roth, what evidence do you have to suggest that LEO broadband will be able to meet the law's performance requirements at all times for the entirety of the locations it has been awarded?
I agree that the law is what should govern our decisions, and that's exactly what we've done by restoring technology neutrality in the program.
But do you have any evidence to suggest that LEO broadband will be able to meet the law's performance requirements?
So maybe I could just to explain, rather than requiring a tech mandate on the states, we enabled the states to determine which technologies would work in different areas, given that we have diverse conditions across the country. And that's, Congress wrote the law in that manner. Congress set out performance requirements.
I understand, but look, let me issue this. In order to verify compliance with the law, will NTIA publicly release the results of BEAD subgrantee speed and performance testing, or direct the states to publish performance testing results? That's a way for us to get to the bottom of it.
Yeah, that's in our rules.
You will do that.
Each provider is required to abide by our performance testing.
No, I'm asking you if you'll publicly release the results of the BEAD subgrantee speed and performance testing, or direct the states to publish performance testing results. This is a specific question, yes or no?
Yes, aggregated data
All right,
is
I appreciate it, because I do believe transparency is important to verify compliance with the law. I'm also concerned that you've restricted states' ability to hold delinquent providers accountable or penalize subgrant recipients for failing to deploy or reserve capacity. And I think it's critical that we have some level of insight and accountability into the BEAD program going forward. So NTIA's semi-annual report requirements for the BEAD program mandate that states submit detailed progress reports every 6 months. And this report is designed to track progress across the various stages of the BEAD grant rollout. So my last question is, Administrator, will you commit to publishing these semi-annual reports online while protecting confidential information, just as NTIA did for the Broadband Technology Opportunity Program? Again, specific question, will you commit to publish these semi-annual reports online? I understand there's some certain confidential information, but, you know, that it would not be included, but will you agree to publish those?
Yes,
All right, I
performance is
appreciate
already
it.
required. Yes.
I appreciate it. I wrote in a November 2025 letter to you that good stewardship of taxpayer dollars is as much about the quality and value of the dollars spent as it is about the bottom line. So I am concerned about, you know, these investments, you know, being made, you know, at the cheapest level as opposed to what I consider quality, and I think that that's wrong. But I appreciate your responses today, and we'll follow up. Thank you, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
I appreciate that. You look like you wanted to say something. I'll give you a few seconds to answer that if you'd like.
I would just say that we agree we want every American to have high-quality broadband service. Our view is that performance is the gold standard, not any particular technology. That's how Congress wrote the law, and Congress was smart to write that. The bipartisan Congress was smart to write the law like that, given incredible innovation.
I don't think that's what you're doing, but I appreciate your responses today because I think we'll have some transparency, hopefully, based on your responses. So thank you, Mr.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the vice chair of the full committee, representative from Georgia, Mr. Allen, for 5 minutes for your questions.
Thank you, Chairman Hudson, for holding this hearing, and thank you, Administrator Roth, for being here today. Georgia has been recognized as the best state, my home state, to do business in 12 years in a row, and obviously because of our favorable business environment there, but also the cost of deployment of resources and that kind of thing. In fact, a home in California costs 3 times the same home built in Georgia. So in deploying these funds, it's interesting. Again, we make governance for deploying funds throughout the country, but doing business in some states is nearly impossible because of either labor agreements or other things, which affects my district. But getting back to Chairman Guthrie talking about the 2.7 gigahertz band, he talked about the timeline. Can you tell me a little bit about the factors that present the greatest risk to that timeline and what this committee and Congress can do to assist NTIA in expeditious identification in the auction? What's holding this up?
So maybe I could just mention, thank you for meeting me in your office. It was really great to meet with you, and I agree with your point that regulatory conditions in a state are very important for ensuring swift deployment of broadband. It's something that we've really taken to heart in BEAD. And I think, was your question about spectrum?
Yeah,
Okay.
spectrum.
Okay.
What's holding up the auction?
So I would say we are moving aggressively and nothing is holding anything up. We are working aggressively across all the bands that we're setting to get them identified and into the marketplace as quickly as possible.
What can Congress do to expedite this?
Yeah, I think one of the things to look at is potentially timelines for the ability to secure spectrum relocation funds, which is a critical part of NTIA's work to identify spectrum for commercial use. But that being said, we are working aggressively. We just the SRF funds for the 2.7 gigahertz band just completed the congressional notification process, so funds are going to be available imminently to begin those studies, and we're working across all of the bands that we're identifying.
Okay.
We're going to get 7 gigahertz identified.
So things are moving as fast as the government can move.
Yeah, we are working around the clock to get spectrum identified, given its
All right, I've got a few more questions. Rural broadband access and the connectivity issues remain a top concern for my constituents, again, because of, the policies of the previous administration as far as labor agreements and all this other stuff. Recently, NTIA chose to apply FCC pole attachment rules and regulations across the entirety of a pole owning sub-grantee's footprint as a condition of participation in the BEAD program, including to entities like cooperatives that are exempt from these rules. Can you explain the requirement and the rationale for including it in BEAD?
Thank you, Congressman. I think it really goes back to your point that ensuring that there's a hospitable environment to innovation is critical to our ability to deliver on our statutory obligation of ensuring BEAD projects are carried out in a timely and effective manner. We've really tried to learn from the past, and one of the past lessons that we know is that pole access can be a serious impediment when it comes to getting projects deployed in a timely and effective manner. And so our job is to ensure that BEAD doesn't get held up by pole access. So and that there is a COP on the BEAD. Section 224 of the Communications Act still applies, and state laws still apply to the extent that they govern municipal and cooperative poles. But there is a risk that that in BEAD, that because pole owners have entered BEAD markets, that incentives aren't necessarily aligned with the goals of BEAD, and so we just need to have a COP on the beat.
Well,
on poles.
these co-ops, Electrified America, they're doing great work. Come down and talk to them about how best to do this, and before you implement something that they have to deal with. I have another question. I'll submit it for the record because I'm out of time, and I'll yield back. Thank you very much.
Thank the gentleman, the chair, and I'll recognize the gentleman from Florida, Representative Soto, for 5 minutes for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Unfortunately, rural America has lost faith in the rollout of the rural broadband program. We've seen 18 months of bureaucracy, 18 months of talk, 18 months of delay. A lot of my folks back home think that the rural broadband plan was actually the smaller rollout of the American Rescue Plan on broadband, because that's the only thing that's happened to date since 2021. We saw March of 11th, 2021, the American Rescue Plan was signed into law. In December 1st, 2022, Florida was one of 6 states to get funds under the American Rescue Plan Capital Projects Fund. And in February 2nd, 2023, Governor DeSantis announces Yeehaw Junction, Kenansville, in our district received $4 million, and Deer Park and Bold Creek received $3.6 million to deploy fiber and connect rural areas of Osceola County. I can tell you this was a huge change for a lot of folks down there. Everyone from small business owners like realtors, folks who are using Wi-Fi and GPS and other technologies for cattle and citrus and smart farming. It was a big help for them. But then you contrast it to the BEAD program itself, passed into law November 15th, 2021. July 18th, 2022, we saw the letters of intent due from governors. By 2022, in August, they submitted their applications. By 2023, NTIA announced allocations for all states. And then in January 2025, the president unfortunately paused the BEAD program to revamp it. But here we are in, 18 months later, and we still see, I think only Louisiana is the only state that's had some broadband actually built already. Florida's program was approved on January 7th, 2026, which we appreciate. But I guess my question, Secretary Roth, is when will Floridians actually see broadband built in Florida?
So we agree that expediting broadband needs to be front and center, and it's been front and center of everything we've done in course correcting the BEAD program. We had to course correct the program when we got here, precisely because the program had failed to connect any Americans during the previous administration. And now, only a year after the restructuring notice, we have deployment out the door. I was recently in Ogallala, Nebraska, for the groundbreaking of a BEAD project where a fixed wireless provider was delivering gigabit service to a community. That was a technology that was prohibited from participating, and they're delivering excellent service to the community and on an expedited timeline.
Look,
We wouldn't
that's-
have seen that if we had put all of our eggs in one basket.
Reclaiming my time, I think that's great. And we certainly want broadband and cellular and satellite to be part of it. But my question is, when do you think Florida will finally see this stuff happen?
Yeah, so right now, states like Florida are signing their BEAD subcontract agreements with providers, and 5 states have already signed with satellite providers for immediate service in eligible areas. Thanks to our approach to the program, we're going to see also streamlined permitting. Louisiana was one state that was able to complete 25,000 environmental reviews thanks to our cloud-based permitting tool. We're going to see.
Is Louisiana the only state that has actually started breaking ground on the broadband aspect of it?
No, states across the nation are leveraging our permitting tools to get approvals.
But which
and
states have
shovels.
pardon me, which states have broken ground already on the broadband aspect of this?
There are so Louisiana and Nebraska have already gotten communities connected through projects, through fixed wireless projects.
So we have 2 states so
as
far.
well as five states have signed agreements with satellite providers, and those consumers will be able to get technology right now.
Well, and look, I agree with you that there should be redundancy in different technologies utilized. We launch SpaceX and Blue Origin rockets from Central Florida, and was part of getting some discretion early on before in the last administration. I do think that's got to be a part of it. And this committee stands ready to work with you to speed this up a little bit. 2 states is, a long cry away from where we need to be, and we want to work with you on that. And I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Ohio, Representative Latta, for 5 minutes for your question.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for holding this really important hearing today. And Secretary, thanks very much for being with us today. It was a privilege of mine to chair this subcommittee and did a lot of work during the time when we saw BEAD come online. But let me get some dates right here. It was 2021 that BEAD became law. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And the Trump administration came in January of 2025.
Correct.
How much of a deployment was made in that period of time from 2021 to January 25?
Not a single home connect.
Not anything, period, 0. And we had, it was an estimate at that time that we had 8 million households across this country that did not have broadband at that time. And during that period of time from 2021 to 2025, 0 got deployed. I know that I was out in my district, and I was at one of my community colleges, and they were trying to get people instructed in how to deploy broadband because of thinking that it was going to be happening quickly. Well, the locals knew more about things in Washington, D.C. And they said, one of the meetings I was at, number one, we didn't have the people that had the right training to get them out there to deploy. And the second thing they told me was they didn't have the trucks with a bucket on them that might take 1.5 years to 2 years. And I asked the previous folks at NTIA if they'd even considered that, and they said no. So there's a lot of other things out there that were contributing factors, but to just get this deployed is really important. Were there regulations out there at the time that really put things behind for states to try to get the broadband deployed during the previous administration?
Yes, we saw there were a plethora of negative consequences from the red tape and hostile mandates that were on the program when we inherited it. But thanks to our reforms, states were able to target projects to the right areas based on their unique circumstances. we're seeing increased skin in the game with a 40% nationwide project match, which is really indicative of projects being sustainable. And we're on track to connect the entire country, whereas there was a real risk, including identified by the 2025 OIG report, that under the previous rules, certain states were going to run out of money and areas would be left behind.
And here's another situation that I think that you have to think about. The longer we take to get something done in this country with regulations, and there's money that's been appropriated, because of inflation, it's worth less. So would that be a contributing factor out there too, that we have to consider that, we don't have the $42.8 billion that have been appropriated?
Yeah, no, through taking out red tape, participation went up. Providers that had previously stayed out came back to the table. That brought down prices and created much better outcomes for consumers. Even within fiber projects, there was one company that won an award in a Midwestern state in 15 counties. Its ask to the government decreased from $2 million between the previous rules and under our rules. That's a real win for taxpayers.
Well, and you said a real magic word here in Washington, cutting red tape. That's music to a lot of people's ears. And Secretary, the NTIA had not been reauthorized for over 30 years, and legislation that I worked on that has been signed into law is making sure, it's important that we get that, NTIA into the next century, you might say. Could you speak to the changes they've made to the deployment program to ensure that we don't repeat what happened in the previous administration with the changes that we've made for reauthorization for NTIA?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yeah. Could you speak to the changes that have made to the deployment program to ensure that we don't repeat what happened in the previous administration? I've only got about 39 seconds.
Yeah, no, we stripped out red tape and hostile mandates. We restored the program to its statutory mission, and we've seen incredible results from that in terms of participation, a diverse technology mix, more skin in the game for for projects, and universal connectivity on a more expedited timeline. Projects currently getting deployed as we speak.
In my last 8 seconds, when do you expect to see breaking ground in Ohio?
Well, the state is working with providers to sign subgrants, and thanks to our work in expediting permitting, we will see continued groundbreaking in 2026 and scaling into 2027.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My time's expired, and I'll submit my other questions for the Secretary in writing. Thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman's time's expired. Chair, I'll recognize the representative from California, Mr. Ruiz, for 5 minutes for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Across much of rural America in my district, reliable broadband is a dire necessity. I have spoken with and seen families whose children have had to rely on hotspots or public Wi-Fi to complete their homework, and with patients in rural communities who have struggled to access telehealth appointments. In fact, some of our school buses have hotspots, and they have to park near trailer parks and neighborhoods so the kids can go and use their school buses just to use the internet. When a child cannot learn from home or a patient cannot connect with their doctor, the digital divide becomes a barrier to opportunity, education, and healthcare. That's why ensuring affordable, reliable broadband reaches every community is so important, and for too many rural and tribal communities, the promise of high-speed internet remains unfulfilled. Families continue to struggle with inadequate connectivity. Students still face barriers to completing schoolwork, and tribal nations are often left waiting at the back of the line for infrastructure investments that other communities take for granted. That is why Congress created the Broadband Equity, Access, and Deployment, or the BEAD program, to close the digital divide once and for all. So California was allocated nearly $1.9 billion through the BEAD program and has spent years working with local governments, providers, and tribal nations to develop its plan. Yet communities in my district are still waiting for certainty as NTIA continues reviewing state proposals under quote-unquote revised program requirements. Administrator Roth, Thank you for visiting me last week in the office. I had a wonderful conversation. Can you provide a timeline for when California's BEAD final proposal will receive NTIA approval?
Thank you, and thank you for meeting me in your office. It was really interesting to discuss the issue that you mentioned of children's technology use. Really appreciated our conversation. In terms of California, we would want to see every last state approved, including California. We have communicated certain challenges.
What's the timeline? When can we expect a decision?
Yeah, so right now, the ball is in California's court. We've communicated changes that we're going to need to see in order to ensure that the proposal complies with our rules and the principles of benefit of the bargain. And we're really looking forward to getting California across the finish line, as well as all states and territories.
So while California continues to wait for its final approval, all states, tribal nations, local communities still lack clarity about how remaining BEAD resources can be used and who will benefit. I will remain deeply concerned that we continue to face delays on this issue. So we were explicitly promised that guidance would be issued this month, and it has not happened. The continued failure to deploy it is unacceptable. We need certainty, we need completion of these guidance. Administrator Roth, can you commit that NTIA's funding decisions will be based on statutory program requirements and broadband deployment needs rather than state policy disagreements?
Absolutely. Our job is to implement the law, and that has been a front and center for us as we've approached the BEAD program, and I think is evident from the decisions we've made.
I also remain concerned about the long-term stability of the Universal Service Fund. Communities in my district, including rural agricultural communities and tribal nations, depend on these programs to remain connected. That is why I introduced the Tribal Internet Expansion Act, which would ensure that tribal nations are explicitly included within the statutory framework guiding universal service policy rather than relying solely on administrative discretion. While I was pleased NTIA finally announced new funding opportunities for tribes under existing programs that had been on hold, I am disappointed by how long those processes were delayed, and that the announcements were made only when you were right about to appear before this committee. Administrator Roth, can we get your commitment that NTIA will work with Congress to strengthen tribal broadband access and support policies that recognize tribal nations as essential partners in achieving universal service?
Absolutely. We respect tribal sovereignty at NTIA, and we actually held 2 tribal consultations in developing our TBCP guidance in January, and ensuring that tribes get universally connected has been at the heart of our reforms to the TBCP program.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the representative from Virginia, Representative Griffith, for 5 minutes for your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. We had a lot of delays in getting the plan approved originally during the Biden administration. Virginia was one of the first to submit. But I'm glad to see that as a part of what you all have reworked, that you've allowed for low Earth orbit satellite internet to be used as a part of the BEAD program. I may have told you when you came to my office, or may have mentioned it in the hearing, I don't remember where, but I actually had a gentleman in Grayson County, Virginia, who came to me and said, you know, we're never going to get it. And the bottom line is, in a mountainous region of Virginia, it may not be as big as the mountains out west, but you can't run fiber to every nook and cranny, every holler out there, and we're going to need low Earth orbit. And he was thrilled when I told him that had now been included as a part of the plan, and looks forward to that getting some lower cost for him to be able to get the low Earth orbit internet availability. And further, I have to say, I think it's very prudent, and I think you might agree, to have redundant technologies in regions for critical broadband customers like hospitals and schools, you probably want to have more than just one. And I also bring up Grayson County because that was part of it borders North Carolina. And it got hit hard by Hurricane Helene. And I went out and observed a road that was completely gone, just gone. And in the road bed was the fiber. So that end of the county that had fiber was out for months because of that. Now, fortunately, the hospital in the region was not affected by that because it was far enough to the east that it didn't get as much damage. They had other issues, but they didn't have that issue. But don't you think that the allowing BEAD to be used with low Earth orbit satellite will help our hospitals and our schools to stay online in times of natural disaster? Mike.
Make sure your mic's on there.
Still getting used to this. Thank you, Congressman, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity to meet with you and discuss, your district's challenges, especially as such a rural part of Virginia. And I really agree with you that, different technologies are going to work in different areas. That was what the bipartisan Congress recognized in writing the BEAD law. It set out performance requirements that each technology had to meet. Our gold standard is ensuring that projects meet those performance requirements, but it didn't make sense, given the diverse conditions of our country, to force a one-size-fits-all solution down the states, especially as you mentioned that different technologies work differently. Fiber is is an incredible technology, and indeed most of our program is fiber. But as we've seen, there have been incredible innovations in fixed wireless technology. A technology that just was seen as inferior now can provide gigabit service even in non-line of sight environments. And similarly with technology, with satellite, we've seen incredible increases in throughput and latency, new generations of satellites coming online, new launches. And I think it's just not correct or a reflection of reality to consider a single technology inferior. It's at odds with our America's historical approach to facilities-based innovation and competition that has made America's broadband the best in the world.
I appreciate it. Now let me shift to maybe a little more difficult subject because you've got good folks competing, but there have been some and you all have updated BEAD to provide guidance explicitly conditioning funding on following pole attachment statutes. Will you commit to referring entities for FCC enforcement and clawing back BEAD funding if pole attachment statutes are not followed by the BEAD grant recipients?
Yeah, so part of our role right now at NTI is oversight and ensuring that projects are deployed in a timely and effective manner. And that part of that is working to figure out where there are challenges on the ground and working with companies and states to address those. We have a process in our rules and our terms and conditions specifically on addressing permitting challenges.
And last but not least, I will just note that I thought it was interesting. Not only did we have delays in the Biden administration, but there were requests earlier for you to talk about some laws and where did you all get your authority? And I remember, because of the problem we had in Virginia with the Biden administration, that one of the things they were trying to force at that time was that there be a specific low-cost plan that met the approval of the Biden administration, and yet the law specifically prohibits you from, you're supposed to have a low-cost plan, but the law specifically prohibits you from deciding what that low-cost plan is, doesn't it?
I agree. The law specifically prohibits from rate regulating and micromanaging markets in that way. I think a bipartisan Congress recognized that that was not the right approach to to maximize participation and success in the program.
And I yield back.
Thank you. Gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the representative from California, Mr. Peters, for 5 minutes for your question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Administrator Roth, for joining us today, and thank you also for meeting with me earlier on. In November 2021, Congress voted to invest over $42 billion to advance America's goal of universal broadband service, with over $1.8 billion reserved for California in the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment, or BEAD program. And when I came to Congress One of the things I heard all the time was about rural broadband. Republicans were really concerned about that. And in the pandemic, we learned that the digital divide wasn't just rural, urban. It was also, it existed in wealthy cities like my own. And so this was a really important thing. It was a huge advance. And I have to say, I was critical of the Biden administration's deployment of this. I was frustrated that after 3 years, we didn't have any projects in the ground. And the witness came here when the Republicans took the majority, and the Democratic witness said the states hadn't gotten through the paperwork yet. She said it was hard to do. And I thought that the criticism of the Biden administration was in many respects very fair. And this administration came in promising to speed up the timelines. And after months of silence on BEAD funding at the beginning of last year, NTIA requires states to go through an entirely new process, the benefit of the bargain round. And because of this additional round, states that were on the cusp of receiving funding at the beginning of 2025 were delayed by at least 11 months. Then NTIA missed its own deadline to issue non-deployment guidance by months. That threatened the ability of states to do critical permit process overhauls to ensure the success of the program. California has still not received its funding for this critical program. California is one of only 2 states that has yet to receive final proposal approval from NTIA. And we know that if California were to receive NTIA approval today, my state will still need to seek final approval from NIST, receive the notice of its award, sign its award agreement, a process that is likely to take anywhere from an additional 6 months to a year. That's if NTIA were to approve California's final plan today. After months of going back and forth between NTIA and California on its final proposal, with multiple rounds of curing earlier this spring, California thought it was nearing final approval. And then after months of silence from NTIA recently sent California a completely new round of curing requests with new issues and questions NTIA had never previously raised. So we all know California will not be seeing the money anytime soon, leaving our unserved and underserved rural and urban communities behind. Administrator Roth, can you explain how changes brought under your leadership have fulfilled your claims of accelerating BEAD deployment, and when should Californians expect to see shovels in the ground?
Thank you, Congressman, and it was great to talk to you in your office. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to explain some of the challenges that we've seen in California. I told you one of the challenges that I think you mentioned in our approach to curing was that there were some mapping anomalies. We found, we oversighted the program, and conducting our due diligence is really important to ensure protection of taxpayer dollars. And there were several examples in California where there were requests for really exorbitant amounts of money, ostensibly to serve apartments in the middle of nowhere. And so we had to work with the state to ensure that we address those mapping challenges. We're working with the state. We look forward to receiving California's revised proposal so that we can get California and all states and territories across the finish line. But I think that the data speaks for itself with respect to expediting projects. Thanks to our restoring the program to its statutory mission, we've already seen.
You said that before. You said we've got projects in Louisiana, we got a project in Nebraska. And that, to me, that's not that great. What we have now is, instead of a 3-year delay, we have a 5-year delay. The witness is here blaming the states. The witness is here telling about how it's hard. The same things we heard from the Biden witness when you all came into the majority. I hope you're not breaking your arms, patting yourselves on the back that this is better. This is the same. This is the same. We have instead of a 3-year delay, we have a 5-year delay. And I would love to see some of the same frustration that I showed with the administration of my own party on the other side of the aisle, to see the Republicans showing frustration with this implementation, because this is unacceptable. It's as unacceptable as it was at the beginning of this term. I have more questions, but I'll submit them in writing. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes Representative Fulcher for his 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Administrator Roth, I want to start with a thank you. In May, we had sent an inquiry in regard to the possible use of next generation 911 deployment, and didn't get a full answer yet for a number of reasons. However, you were very responsive, and just the response means a lot, keeping us cued in on the status. In my state, we have a lot of rural space, and the rural broadband deployment is a big, big deal. In addition to being a member of Energy and Commerce, I'm also on Natural Resources, and one of the things that we struggle with is a permitting process for this deployment. That's a huge issue for us, and a huge issue in terms of how this deployment is handled, the timeliness of which it's handled, and whatnot. To what extent is NTIA involved, or suggestions have you got in regard to working with federal, state, for this permitting process? A lot of this is on or related to federal land. We've got about 34 million acres of that. To what extent is NTIA involved with that, and what's happening there?
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to meet with you. So permitting is front and center of our efforts to expedite deployment in the BEAD program. We're really focused on, not just getting paperwork out the door, but actual deployment. And we know that permitting has been one of the historical challenges when it comes to broadband deployment. What we've done at NTIA is we've introduced a cloud-based software tool to really expedite and automate the permitting process. We have 47 categorical exclusions that will apply to, we estimate, about 95% of BEAD projects. And through our software tool, we've seen really a much more expeditious process. For a process that used to be email-based and took 3 to 6 months is now taking 48 hours, according to one of the state broadband directors. And the proof is in the data. There were 25,000 locations just got through our permitting process thanks to that tool. And we're working with other federal agencies, Fish and Wildlife Service, National Council on Historic Preservation, to expedite things at the federal level. But as you said, there are also a lot of challenges at the state and local level. And so we are working with states to streamline processing, expedite timelines, reduce permitting costs, because ultimately that's what will make the BEAD program successful and avoid default. And I also commend this committee's efforts to address some of those challenges through its legislation.
Okay. Our experience is most of those challenges on permitting have been federal, but understand that there's also the state and local. Just keep that in mind. It's a big issue for us in rural Idaho. Shifting gears a little bit, you'd referenced the study, or that had been talked about briefly, but the One Beautiful Bill calls for a study of the 2.7 megahertz band. What's the timeline on that in terms of completing that study?
So we are working aggressively to complete that study and get spectrum identified in that band. We actually just finished the 60-day congressional notification process to get SRF funding to incumbent agencies, NOAA and the FAA, so that we can complete the requisite studies and identification and get the spectrum auction. It's certainly one of the bands that we're working with the FCC to get auctioned as soon as possible.
What's the speed bumps in that regard? Is it personnel? Is it lack of responsiveness from other entities?
No, I think one of the benefits of the president's leadership on spectrum and his presidential memorandum on winning the 6G race is that he's really identified getting spectrum auction as a national priority. And so we're working really cooperatively with other agencies, including the incumbents, to get their systems upgraded and the spectrum identified for auction. And we're also really working very closely with the FCC on this to figure out ways to expedite timelines and achieve the goal of 5 auctions during this administration.
Okay, I do have a question on 1675 megahertz and 70 gigahertz, but I'm going to put that in writing because my time is up. So with that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Carter, for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Minister Roth, for joining us today. In January 2025, Louisiana became the first state in the nation to secure federal approval for a plan to deploy $1.3 billion in funding under the original Broadband Equity, Access, and Deployment, or BEAD program, a program that designed to ensure that everyone, regardless of zip code, has access to affordable, reliable, high-speed internet. But instead of building on that progress, the Trump administration forced states to do years of approval planning, which delayed deployment and caused unnecessary uncertainty. While Louisiana's revised plan has now been approved again, roughly $800 million in Louisiana's BEAD non-deployment funding remains frozen. Those dollars were meant to expand telehealth, strengthen workforce development, improve digital skills, and help rural and underserved communities fully participate in today's economy, not sit idle. These delays are unacceptable. Every day, they continue to cost communities the connectivity, growth, and opportunity they deserve. Administrator Roth, Louisiana kept its bargain in a bipartisan manner, first under Democratic Governor John Bel Edwards, and then Republican Governor Jeff Landry. We worked with state, local, and federal partners to become the first state in the nation with approved BEAD plan. Our communities have done their part. Why hasn't NTIA done theirs? What's the holdup in releasing the deployment funds?
Well, thank you, Congressman. Louisiana has, as you've seen, been extremely successful in its final proposal. The governor of Louisiana has spoken publicly about the benefit of the bargain reforms in promoting ubiquitous connectivity across the state, and we've already started to see deployment. We want to ensure that...
I'm sorry, I have about 2 minutes left. Can you just tell me what's the holdup, respectfully?
We're trying to get the guidance right, not just rush money out the door, because...
But when the Biden administration was trying to get the guidance right, you said you were wasting time. You can't have it both ways. Let me ask you a quick question, yes or no? Can you assure me that Louisiana will receive its full BEAD allocation, including the $800 million in non-deployment funds?
So Congress allocated funding to the states.
So can you assure us that we'll get it? We have. So
yes.
Now it's in your part. Can you assure me and the people of Louisiana that the $800 million in non-deployment funds will be unfrozen?
The states will get their money according to the law.
So that's a yes?
Yes, we are fully
that's
intent.
good. Thousands of rural economically disadvantaged locations in Louisiana were initially slated for fiber in January 2025, have now, under the benefit of the bargain round, had BEAD funding diverted to Elon Musk's satellite services. How do you justify delivering lower quality broadband to rural and underserved communities under BEAD when higher performance options like fiber are available and states like mine are willing and able to invest in rural communities?
As I've said, performance is the gold standard, and the law was written in a tech-neutral way, and our job is to ensure that every last community gets priority broadband service.
But how do you justify going to an inferior product over a more superior product?
Well, different types of technologies work better in different communities. Fiber can be great. In some places, it's really exorbitant. And, there was an example in Louisiana where...
Would you agree that Louisiana had passed all of its tests, was ready for everything to go, had shovels ready to go on ground? So what's different now? The only thing different now is a new administration that clearly wants to put his fingerprint on it, and I'm fine with that. But don't send us backwards when, in fact, Louisiana, under a Democratic governor and a Republican governor, did all the right things, and now the people of Louisiana are being punished, one, with a delay, two, with $800 million in non-deployment funds being frozen, and three, now getting an inferior product. That doesn't sound like progress. That sounds like gamesmanship.
We agree nobody should be punished, but we disagree that putting a mandate on a single technology means better outcomes. In Louisiana, allowing fixed wireless to participate in the program not only brought down costs, but it
You
also
mentioned-
expedited deployment in the states.
Respectfully, you mentioned in your comment that Louisiana got it right. You mentioned in your comment that you acknowledged that we were first, that we got it right. But now we're being punished by getting an inferior product after the fact, when in fact, we'd gone through all those batteries of tests, all of those hoops, all of those jumps among 2 different administrations, only to find it rechecked, redone, and now we're getting less money, inferior product. That's just not cool. I'd love to meet with you, Administrator Roth, and have a more in-depth conversation. My time has expired now. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Gentleman's time's expired. I'd let the witness take a few seconds if you'd like to respond to that.
I guess I welcome the opportunity to meet with you. Our view is that performance is the gold standard, and I think that the view that, one technology is a one-size-fits-all solution or future-proof just doesn't reflect reality when we've seen incredible amounts of innovation in diverse technologies. Even in the last 5 years, we've seen incredible progress in fixed wireless, a service that's become extremely popular among consumers and is increasingly viable and scalable. And the same goes with respect to satellite. We've been seeing incredible increases in the technology that I think weren't anticipated several years ago, and I think that goes to show the importance of taking a non-distortionary, tech-neutral approach to the program that recognizes diverse conditions in the country and also doesn't put a thumb on the scale for innovation. Innovation
Mr.
has
Chairman, respectfully, if you're going to give the witness an opportunity to continue to speak.
Sir, I gave you an additional
But you didn't
minute
answer
and a
my
half.
question. You just gave her an opportunity for comment.
Well, I gave her the opportunity to answer your
No,
question.
you gave her an opportunity for
Well,
commentary.
the gentleman is not recognized.
Well, I'd ask you
Chair
to
recognizes the gentleman from
answer the
Florida,
question
Mr.
and not
Bilirakis.
offer commentary.
Thank you.
Gentleman is not recognized. Mr. Bilirakis, you
Thank you,
recognize for
Mr.
5
Chairman. I
minutes.
appreciate it very much. In coordination with the NTIA and the FCC, for the past several years, I've been working on legislation that would continue to address tweaks to our telecommunications networks by the Chinese Communist Party and other countries of concern. That work has ultimately led me to the Firewall Act, introduced today by myself and Congressman Soto, who happens to be on the full committee. The Firewall Act would forever ban federal telecommunications funding from companies that choose to purchase fiber optic cable from China. Now is the perfect time to implement such a ban, since Chinese fiber is only a small percentage of the United States market today. Let's not make the same mistake twice. We must end this before we're struck with another multi-billion-dollar rip and replace type program. Assistant Secretary Roth, question again. Can you discuss some of the threats that exist and could exist with the systemic use of Chinese-produced fiber optic cable? And what are your thoughts on instituting a funding ban on companies that choose to ignore these risks? Please.
Thank you, Congressman, for your leadership. The fiber supply chain is something that NTIA closely monitors in our administration. The BEAD program, fiber is critical infrastructure, and it's passive, but we should still be very deliberate in terms of whether of looking at the supply chain and ensuring that federal dollars don't deepen reliance on untrusted supply chains and Chinese influence. I think the broader lesson of the past decade is that building a trusted supply chain is less expensive in the long run in terms of unwinding dependence later. And I haven't had a chance to look into your legislation yet, but I look forward to looking into it and would stand ready to be of assistance, especially as we've looked at these supply chain issues in the context of the BEAD program.
Yeah, I look forward to the conversation. Thank you. As a member of the China Select Committee, I'm concerned about the World Radio Communication Conference being hosted in Shanghai and how China is using its position to undercut American connectivity priorities including Wi-Fi, satellite, and other technologies. Again, Secretary Roth, what steps is the administration taking to ensure that the United States and our allies will be able to fully participate in Shanghai?
Thank you. It's such an important question and an issue that this administration has prioritized. One of the things is that we need to ensure is that we build a coalition support around our positions going into WRC. And we're actively doing that. NTIA recently held a training with 27 regulators from 20 different African countries to work on building support for U.S. strategic priorities when it comes to commercial space, given that the WRC agenda is going to be so satellite-focused. And we also equally are working on finalizing our positions on agenda item 1.7, which focuses on the future of 6G, given that strategic importance to us. So we are working to finalize our positions in advance of CTEL in the fall. But it's not just finalizing positions that's important, also ensuring effective leadership at the ITU, and so we are working to promote U.S. leadership in ITU elections, including through our participation at the Plenipotentiary Conference in the fall. We are working across our work streams to advance American leadership at the ITU, as well as other standard-setting bodies like 3GPP. Telecom is global in nature, and ensuring that global standards reflect our strategic priorities is incredibly important to U.S. economic and national security.
Very good. Thank you. I appreciate your participation today, and thank you for holding this hearing, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Michigan, Representative Dingell, for 5 minutes for her questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for having this hearing, and thank you to the administrator for being here today. This committee has a responsibility to conduct oversight of NTIA. And as many on this committee know, we've made significant progress under the last administration, and I hope we can keep moving forward in the right direction on broadband deployment, affordability, mapping, and spectrum policy. I want to talk specifically today about BEAD implementation in Michigan, which I've discussed with you before, Madam Administrator, and the importance of continued coordination between NTIA and the states to ensure that the projects are moving forward. Michigan will connect nearly 200,000 locations through the BEAD program, the third highest number of eligible locations in the country. Michigan secured $920 million in federal funding and more than $550 million in private investment for a total of $1.47 billion. This funding will support over 31,000 miles of new fiber infrastructure across our state. However, states are still awaiting the guidance regarding the allowable uses of BEAD non-deployment funding. The Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act is clear that these funds can support complementary efforts like expanding permitting capacity, workforce development, digital adoption, mapping, and planning that are necessary to close the digital divide. You've said that speed is your priority, but since NTIA paused the use of non-deployment funds in June 2025, the revised BEAD policy notice that month, states have been left without clear direction on how to move forward. NTIA also missed your imposed self-deadline of March 26 to issue updated guidance, creating uncertainty for states attempting to plan around more than $20 billion in remaining non-deployment funding. I'm sure states, including Michigan, are ready, I know they are, to put resources to work alongside deployment projects to ensure communities can fully access and benefit from reliable, affordable broadband service. Administrator Roth, can you provide a timeline on when NTIA expects to issue updated guidance on non-deployment funding and how NTIA is working with states to ensure these funds can be used effectively and consistent with congressional intent without further delays?
Thank you, Congressman Dingell, and thank you for meeting with me in your office. These funds were freed up because our benefit of the bargain reforms were so successful in driving down costs and ensuring universal connectivity. And we want to ensure that these remaining funds produce the same measurable wins for taxpayers. And we're actively working on the guidance right now to use these dollars responsibly. As you know, we received an unprecedented amount of feedback on potential ways the dollars should be used. So we've just been focused on getting our guidance right at this point, which has taken us additional time. And so we are. And you asked about a timeline. As I said to Chairman Hudson, we expect to release the guidance this summer.
I'm going to hold you to that. I've also heard concerns about the process requiring states to remove locations from BEAD projects when changes are made to the FCC broadband service location fabric, even in situations where those homes or businesses clearly need service. Can you tell us how NTI is working with states to ensure that technical or mapping revisions do not unintentionally leave eligible communities behind? And are you considering additional flexibility for states to address these situations?
Thank you. So in the BEAD law requires us to follow the FCC maps and also run a challenge process in determining which areas we're going to be eligible for BEAD funding. That was important for two reasons. First of all, we needed to give bidders the certainty they needed to know what they were bidding on, and also to ensure that there was a requisite challenge process to ensure that the program wasn't engaged in overbuilding. And so, maps are constantly changing as conditions change. We regularly update the FCC with our data and where BEAD deployments are occurring. And, our eligible areas, given that, may not match up perfectly with the FCC maps, but that's because of the need to, that's because we were required to run a challenge process. Given that such changes happen over time, one of the ideas that's been proposed for the remaining funds has been a cleanup round to address locations that have, become potentially unserved after we established eligible areas in the BEAD program.
Gentlelady's time has expired. The chair now recognizes a representative from Texas, Mr. Pfluger, for 5 minutes for your questions.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Assistant Secretary Roth. I want to thank you for your efforts to reduce fraud, waste, and abuse. Specifically, and it's been talked about today, the efforts here on BEAD-funded projects with just the wastefulness that you've uncovered, that you're preventing, and delivering the intended dollars to rural areas that truly need it. So thank you for that. I want to kind of shift gears. I've heard from domestic manufacturers who invested tens of millions of dollars in new equipment facilities to supply BEAD projects with American-made optical fiber, and they did so based on the assurances that domestic fiber supply would be available to support them, and that supply hasn't materialized. And now there's idle equipment and unfilled jobs sitting on the sidelines. So just from your perspective, based on what NTIA is seeing today, are those supply commitments being met? And if not, can NTIA act to help that? And are there examples where NTIA would consider a targeted waiver to support American manufacturing jobs?
Thank you for your question, and thank you for meeting with me and for your kind words on addressing waste in the BEAD program. Effective oversight of the program is so critical to ensure that taxpayer dollars are used responsibly and also ensure universal connectivity, because there were projects that were, if we hadn't done so, there had been a risk raised by the OIG that we would run out of money, which I think no one on this committee would have wanted. In terms of fiber and availability, we want to ensure that projects are deployed expeditiously, so we've actively monitored the fiber supply chain in the program, and fiber producers have given us their word that fiber will be delivered on time to BEAD projects, and we expect them to honor their commitments.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. Some of the companies have not met their contractual requirements. So would you see a case where if those domestic manufacturers don't do that and they have a contract with the government, with with the BEAD program, I mean, are there waivers that y'all would consider for specifically for Made in America type issues?
NTIA has an ability to, there's a process for waiving BABA, or the Buy America provisions as you referenced, but we don't anticipate a waiver at this point as long as domestic manufacturers step up as they've promised. I think it also goes to show the importance of having, a mix of technologies in the program. Putting our eggs in one basket, I think, wouldn't have been a good outcome for ensuring expeditious and timely deployment of universal broadband.
Thank you, and we'll certainly be watching that and working with you. One of our top legislative priorities is the Protocol Act, which would consolidate the FCC's broadband maps and NTIA's data into a single and consistent and reliable source. The bill would also require other federal broadband agencies to use this unified data. It would work with the states. It would do the work of trying to consolidate this. So my question, currently more than 130 broadband programs exist across 15 different agencies. So you can, the consolidating it and understanding it and gleaning the important pieces of vulnerabilities or gaps is really important on it. From your perspective at NTIA, what's the benefit of requiring other agencies to coordinate with NTIA and use a single harmonized broadband data set when planning and funding infrastructure projects?
Thank you for your leadership on this issue of mapping. It's so important to have accurate data in order to ensure that federal dollars are protected. Given that challenge that you referenced of the multiple different programs, 100 different broadband programs across 15 different agencies, so that risk is quite real. We have relied on the FCC maps and run a challenge process in our administration of BEAD. We work with the FCC, but definitely welcome the opportunity to work with you, and thank you for your leadership on potential ways to make mapping even better.
Thank you. Lastly, I'm out of time, but I'll submit a question for the record dealing with the BEAD program and the money that Texas has promised to match, which is $1.5 billion, just to make sure that the federal and the state pools of money are deconflicted. So I'll submit that for the record. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the representative from Ohio, Mr. Landsman, for 5 minutes for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Administrator Roth. I want to start with the cybersecurity work. This is a huge concern of mine. The current system is a patchwork, and across several agencies in terms of reporting, prevention, mitigation efforts. There's been some discussion about expanding your role, the administration's role, in dealing with the cybersecurity threats, protecting us. Can you talk a little bit about what that would look like? Whether NTIA's role would be expanded, what that would look like, your approach, your thinking on this?
No, thank you. This is a really important issue. NTIA, we're not a regulator, but we do play a role in ensuring secure networks. In BEAD, for example, states are required to get attestations from BEAD providers that they have cybersecurity risk management plans in place, as well as similar plans for supply chain risks. And NTIA also works on cybersecurity in the context of our communications supply chain risk information program. We provide information on latest best practices to companies, including small and rural communities. So I think we do play and could continue to play a really important role in terms of training and providing information on best practices and as well as on supply chain risk.
But you'd welcome the role of expanding some of the work that you guys are doing in cybersecurity if the DHS CERCIA rule includes an expanded role for you all.
Not a legal
I
question.
haven't had
assume,
an opportunity to dig in on that issue, but I would be happy to get back to you more in depth on that.
Yeah, I would love to keep the conversation going because it does seem like additional leadership is needed, that you all could play, but could play an even bigger role. The reporting requirements piece is a challenge as, folks who experience an attack or believe there's an issue. The reporting requirements differ by agencies, and so I have a bill that would streamline that, so there's just the one reporting protocol. How important do you think that is, in terms of what you hear and see on a daily basis?
I think that generally speaking, streamlining reporting requirements is a really great way to advance efficiencies and promote American technology leadership.
Yeah, thank you. I agree. One last thing, we have a bill that would make it easier to get broadband out to communities, our Rail Act, which I think we talked about. It takes advantage of the public right-of-way and streamlines the process for getting that broadband over the railroad tracks, which has become a challenge because the railroad companies oftentimes take forever and upcharge these providers. How important, that's for the FCC, but obviously something similar would apply to what you all are doing. Are you seeing opportunities to do similar sort of reforms in terms of getting the broadband out?
Yes, this has been a very strong focus of NTIA. As you know, permitting is one of the biggest challenges when it comes to effective and expeditious deployment of broadband. We focused on what we can do at the federal level to streamline permitting, particularly through automating certain processes and working with other agencies. But as you recognize, the state and local and challenges can be even greater. And
You may have done this before, but have you submitted your list of permitting reform recommendations to this committee?
I have not, but I would welcome the opportunity.
I think that would be
with
great.
this.
Yeah, I would. We'll follow up.
Great.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes a representative from Texas, Mr. Goldman, for 5 minutes for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here today, Ms. Roth. Texas is facing uncertainty around the release of BEAD funds necessary to manage program changes, rebid 31,000 locations, and keep broadband deployment projects on schedule. What is causing these funds to be held up, and how will NTIA ensure that any delays do not make it harder for Texas to reconnect these vacant locations or leave Texans with lower quality service options?
Thank you for your question, and thank you for meeting with me. Texas was able to submit a very successful final proposal. They were actually the last state to submit their initial proposal under the previous rules, but because the state really did a really amazing job of looking at each project area by project area closely and evaluating every technology in every different area. The state produced really incredible results and has a really diverse mix of technologies reflecting the diverse topography and geography of the state. And they're achieving universal access with a 32% match, which is above the statutory requirement, is a really great indication of the project's sustainability and success. And so right now, the state is signing contracts with providers. That can be a challenging process, and NTIA has stood ready to help the state whenever there have been, and providers whenever there have been issues or questions. But ultimately, thanks to our work to streamline permitting, we expect to see contracts signed, and I think Texas is one of the states that already has a contract signed with a LEO provider enabling instant access to BEAD service.
Thank you. And following up on that, Texas being a national leader in wireless innovation, semiconductor manufacturing, telecommunications, as you know, NTIA's spectrum decisions will directly affect jobs and investment across our state. As NTIA implements the spectrum provisions that we passed last year and evaluates the 2, 4, and 7 gigahertz bands, can you update us on the progress of that work and how would implementing these provisions advance U.S. and Texas leadership in 5G and 6G and next-generation community technologies?
Yeah, no, as you said, Texas is a leader when it comes to technological innovation. I actually recently visited the Ericsson 5G factory, which was so incredible to see the kind of automation that the factory automation that is bringing next generation connectivity to the state and to the country and the world. I think, as you said, as you mentioned, getting our spectrum identified under the Working Families Tax Cut Act is the best way that is one of our best ways to promote that continued innovation, increase economic growth, promote national security, as well as domestic jobs. And so we're laser focused on completing that identification and getting more spectrum into the marketplace as quickly as possible so that the U.S. can continue to lead in this area.
Thank you. And since you've joined NTIA, how have you seen the BEAD program change, and what steps does NTIA need to take to make sure communities are getting connected?
We've seen incredible success through our stripping out of red tape, removal of burdensome rules, allowing the states to determine, like Texas, which technologies would work in different parts, in different project areas. And we've seen results from that. We're getting deployment out the door, as we've seen deployment in multiple states already, and that was thanks to our embracing an all-of-the-above solution to the program, consistent with how Congress wrote the law, we're very excited about the deployment that we're starting to see and we'll continue to see in the months ahead.
Great. Thank you again. Thanks for being here. Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, gentleman. He yields back. The chair now recognizes a representative from New York, Representative Clark, for 5 minutes for your questions.
Good morning, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Matsui, for holding this important hearing today. It is a long overdue hearing given the issues at NTIA. Access to affordable, reliable, high-speed broadband is no longer a luxury. It is an absolute necessity for economic survival, education, even healthcare in our increasingly digital society. When Congress passed the bipartisan infrastructure law, we made an historic $42 billion investment in the BEAD program with a clear statutory mandate to build sustainable, future-proof networks and close the digital divide once and for all. Unfortunately, under Administrator Roth's leadership, the NTIA has systemically undermined those goals. By spending 18 months restructuring the program to the benefit of the president's political benefactor, NTIA has created a chaotic environment where states are forced to stall deployment and taxpayers are left wanting longer for inferior service. Most alarmingly, NTIA has effectively abandoned its statutory commitment to priority broadband projects using high-quality fiber infrastructure, aggressively shifting focus towards temporary satellite options while refusing to enforce statutory low-cost service options for struggling families. To rush to subsidize billionaires and now a trillionaire has led to the abandonment of public interest by this administration and may only serve to solidify a new era of digital redlining. Administrator Roth, historical redlining in the analog age is sadly being directly mirrored today by digital redlining in broadband accessibility during your tenure at NTIA. The BEAD program was structured so that the states would propose the affordable low-cost service options for low-income families. Congress wrote that into law, and yet Your agency is prohibiting the states from having any say in what the low-cost option should be and letting the ISPs set the option themselves. If NTIA refuses to let the states ensure that the low-cost option internet service providers are offering is actually at an affordable rate, how can you claim that you are fulfilling your mission? Is there any cost for a low-cost option that you would consider to be too high? Or what tools do states have to ensure that low-cost options is in fact affordable? What specific guardrails is the NTIA utilizing right now to ensure that low-income and minority communities are not digitally redlined out of this historic infrastructure build-out?
I agree with you that broadband should be affordable. Our job is to implement the law, and Congress has precluded from regulating rates. And I think that's attributable to a broad recognition in data that rate regulation harms investment. In contrast, competition has been hugely successful in promoting broadband affordability. And you even just take fixed wireless, one of the greatest and fastest sources of broadband competition and affordability in home broadband markets. I think that that's why we focus so much on clearing the runway to innovation, ensuring that BEAD isn't putting its thumb on the scale. After all, one of the most competition has been the most effective source in bringing down prices. I know that sometimes subsidies can be one way of looking at it, but we take a more broad approach. One of the best ways that we can use our authorities to promote affordability is through expanding access to spectrum, getting better services into the marketplace. And I think that our nation's historic approach to innovation and facilities-based competition is just evident in the amount of incredible innovation.
Administrator, I've only got like 30 seconds left. I'd like to discuss that further with you. That sounds great, but in the practical application of it, it does not pan out that way. Having said that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady for yielding back. The chair now recognizes the representative from California, Mr. Obernolte, for 5 minutes for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Administrator Roth, thank you for your testimony today. I think you've heard some bipartisan frustration with the slowness of the rollout of BEAD funding. And to be clear, this frustration predates your tenure in the agency. It predates this administration. It's been frustration across the aisle with both Democrat and Republican administrations, and this is in red and blue states. So I hope that you're taking this to heart. This is an indication when you hear this kind of frustration across the aisle that it's not a problem with one state or another state, it's a problem with the system. And this funding is critical to getting broadband connectivity rolled out to our constituents, and I'm hoping that you will take this to heart and try and eliminate some of the bottlenecks so we can get this funding flowing, because that was our intent when we appropriated it. I was very happy to hear you talk about freeing up 500 megahertz of spectrum in your opening testimony. We all know the strain that spectrum is under. I've seen some very alarming projections that say that if nothing is done by the year 2030, just 4 years from now, that over 50% of peak traffic will not have spectrum available, particularly as AI puts more and more demands on that. So I'm very happy that NTIA is focused on that. I wanted to ask specifically about the 2.7 gigahertz band. In HR 1 last year, we directed NTIA to work with stakeholders to clear that spectrum and gave you auction authority for that. Could you tell us a little bit about when you think that that auction might occur?
Thank you for your question, and I agree that we need to get the 2.7 gigahertz band identified as quickly as possible so that it can get auctioned and that providers can, and that it can benefit the commercial marketplace. We're working around the clock on to do our part to get spectrum identified. I'm grateful that soon the incumbent agencies will have access to their spectrum relocation funds so that we can complete our critical engineering work to have a successful auction. And we're working closely with the FCC on timelines and figuring out ways to expedite the process of seeing that spectrum auction just as soon as possible.
Do you think that that might occur by the end of your tenure in the agency?
We're working towards that outcome.
Okay, I'm glad to hear it. I was also very happy to hear you talk about FirstNet reauthorization in your opening testimony. That's something that's critically important to me as someone with a very rural district with a critical need for first responders to be able to communicate. One of the things that I have been a little frustrated by is the fact that FirstNet does not currently interface with any of the low Earth orbit satellite operators. As you know, Starlink, for example, already has direct to cell phone operational capability, and others will soon have that capability. It seems crazy that we're not enabling our first responders to use that. Can you talk a little bit about what NTIA and Congress can do to make sure that new commercial satellite systems are available to first responders through FirstNet?
I agree that first responders should have access to the best technology available. That's FirstNet's mission, to maximize public safety outcomes for the public and for first responders. And I think part of that is really empowering the FirstNet board to determine which investments are needed to maximize public safety outcomes. And I applaud this committee's work on FirstNet. One of the things that the legislation that you've advanced does is clarify roles and responsibilities and really empower public safety's role in increasing public safety seats on the board, improving institutional expertise through staggered terms, as well as really clarifying that public safety is responsible for identifying the strategic use of funding and ensuring that it's public safety that drives the budget and the setting of priorities. And then NTIA can conduct its contract oversight and performance accountability to ensure that those priorities are being carried out. And thanks to our work, Secretary Lutnick was able to, our oversight, we were able to secure an additional $2 billion in value for FirstNet under the contract.
We'll keep working with you on that. My time has expired. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen, for yielding back. The chair now recognizes the representative from California, Representative Barragan, for 5 minutes for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Administrator Roth, you are nominated by the president, correct?
Correct.
And the president can fire you, correct?
Correct.
So you serve at the pleasure of the president and work for the president?
Yes.
Is it safe to say that since you've been confirmed by the Senate, you've spoken to the president?
I'm not going to get into the...
I'm not asking you to get into the conversation. I'm asking you if you have had a conversation with the president since you've been confirmed. That's it. It's a yes or no. You're a lawyer. You know this.
Yeah, no, I think that it would be inappropriate for me to speak to internal deliberations. Obviously, we speak to
I'm not
White
asking
House.
for an internal deliberation. It's a simple question. Whether you've spoken to the president is a yes or no. Asking you about the content of that is a different question. Have you spoken to the president?
I have met the president. But I'm not
For
going
whatever reason you're afraid to say whether you've actually spoken to the president. That is actually concerning because it's a very simple yes or no. You as an attorney know. If I'm asking about the content of a conversation, that could be attorney-client privilege, that's a different question, and you wouldn't instruct your client not to answer whether you've even spoken to a lawyer. So it's extremely frustrating that this hearing, you have just been talking through answers, not answering questions, but kind of like avoiding some of them. Okay, so you may or you've not spoken to the president. Has anybody asked you to hold up the California application for BEAD money?
No, and we're working actively to get California's application approved.
I know you're working actively. I've heard that. But I find it a little hard to believe that the two states that haven't been approved are some of the two bluest states that we've got. And you have 54 other states and territories that have already met the requirements. Is California being held to a different standard than the other states you've already approved?
No, in fact, that's precisely what we're working on, is ensuring that California gets held to the same standards that we've held other states to.
Okay, has the NTIA communicated their concerns to California in writing?
We have certainly communicated our concerns to California, and I can't speak to I can't speak to our deliberations with the state, but we have certainly
So you're unaware,
communicated those concerns to
you're
California.
unaware if they're in writing. What does California need now? What they need now really is certainty. Communities can't plan broadband projects around uncertainty, and they can't connect families with funds that haven't been approved. So I would urge you and the NTIA to move quickly to resolve any of these remaining issues that you're saying California has had. So, Administrator, I want to move on to another topic. The Digital Equity Act created two major grant programs: the State Capacity Grant Program, which helps states expand digital access for local libraries, schools, and nonprofits, and the Competitive Grant Program, which awards grants directly to community organizations. Last year, the Trump administration canceled both. Now the Justice Department says in court, the Competitive Grant Program can move forward if a race-related provision of the law is severed. Does NTIA believe the State Capacity Grant Program can also move forward?
On the advice of my legal, at the advice of my legal counsel, I can't discuss the digital equity program as it's currently in active litigation. I can speak to the Native Entities Grant Program funding that we recently provided guidance on in a new NOFO.
Okay, California was awarded more than $70 million in state capacity grant funding to help more people afford access and use high-speed internet before the Trump administration canceled the program. Now, Republican-led states like Texas, Florida, Alabama, and Louisiana also had millions. The communities across the country deserve a clear answer and a path forward for all of the digital equity grants programs. It's been extremely frustrating at some of the responses or non-responses, and it's been extremely frustrating at the lack of speed in the deploying the BEAD dollars. Now, it was said, people were frustrated in the last administration, but then this administration came in and just took even longer and made it more delay. And with that, I yield back.
The gentlelady yields. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Florida, Representative Cammack.
Thank you,
For 5
Mr.
minutes.
Chairman. I appreciate it, and thank you to our guest for being here today. I'm just going to jump right into it. I know we've had several conversations, and I'm the wife of a first responder back in Florida, so this issue is near and dear to me. So chairing the Next Gen 911 caucus, I know firsthand how critical our reliable emergency communications are and where so many of our gaps exist. So I noted in your testimony that updated NTIA estimates show nationwide Next Gen 911 implementation costs have fallen significantly, down to between 5.8 and 9.27 billion, which is candidly a major shift from prior estimates. Given that lower cost estimate, what do you see is the biggest barrier to nationwide deployment right now? And how can we make sure that our states and localities have the flexibility and support that they need in order to finish the job?
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Cammack, and it was so great to meet with you in your office, and I applaud your leadership on public safety issues, which are obviously near and dear to your heart. I visited 911 centers firsthand. I've seen the benefits of AI tools and modernization of technology to improve location data and dispatch and ultimately better outcomes for public safety. I think that some of the obstacles that we've seen are, obstacles that come to interoperability and ensuring that different jurisdictions are able to talk to each other, that data is able to flow with calls. and ultimately get better resilience and response times. And also one of the other challenges is that some states have invested significantly in NG 911 and others have not. I know that the legislation that the committee has advanced takes account of that reality. But we stand ready to help the committee in its efforts to advance this critical priority, and we did that through our recently released study on nationwide implementation costs.
Well, and let me jump to the kind of dovetailing into that. So we've obviously seen that there are challenges. You highlighted interoperability just now and how it can be fragmented across different agencies and programs. And we talked about the legislation that we had introduced, the Public Safety Communications Act, which would create a dedicated Office of Public Safety Communications within NTIA. And we did that because currently it is not codified. We want to see this codified so we can streamline a lot of the efforts that are being undertaken at the moment and also strengthen accountability. So from your perspective, yes or no, would creating a permanent dedicated office within NTIA improve coordination, accountability, and long-term strategic planning for public safety communications? Yes or no?
Yes.
And what would you say is the biggest gap within the current structure?
Thank you. I appreciate your focus on this. I think that elevating public safety communications is obviously a core responsibility of ours, and so codifying the office would certainly put increased emphasis and focus on this area, especially as we enhance our oversight of FirstNet, engage in NG 911 improvements. And so I would welcome the opportunity to work with you on this legislation and strengthening our public safety role.
Absolutely. Well, and just for the record, if this legislation were to be signed into law, it would help ensure that our first responders have access to resilient, reliable communications, especially when lives are on the line, correct?
Certainly, yes.
Excellent. Well, that about does it on my end. You answered all my questions. So thank you again for your time today, and thank you for appearing before the committee. With that, I yield.
Thank you.
General Lady yields. The chair recognizes the General Lady from Florida, Ms. Castor, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Well, thank you. Welcome, Madam Administrator. You know, inflation is high and everything costs so much these days. And one of the ways that we can help our neighbors back home is with more affordable internet service. That was part of the intention of the bipartisan infrastructure law and all of the BEAD funding to get out quickly. And I have to tell you, I'm very disappointed. I've heard your testimony today. I disagree that what has happened has not been timely and effective at all. In fact, it was very troubling. You cannot answer Representative Soto's direct question on when Florida would receive money after all of these years. And it's also been very troubling what Rep. Barragan touched on, the cancellation of the digital equity competitive grants. The city of St. Petersburg back home won a $6.9 million grant. It was the only one in the state of Florida. That was to pay for hotspots and equipment for people who need internet access for jobs and training. That grant was arbitrarily and illegally canceled by the administration. It has now been challenged in federal court. Would you commit that if the federal court determines that the administration did act arbitrarily and illegally to restore those grant funding, that grant funding?
Oh, well, following the law is of utmost importance. We would absolutely abide by the law.
Okay. Thank you for that. And the law also requires that internet service providers provide a low-cost option for consumers. Certainly then you would agree that it is helpful for customers to know what the low-cost service option will be in their location, right?
Yes, the low-cost option is a programmatic requirement.
Good, thank you. Because I think transparency is important. That's why the law requires NTIA to publicly disclose each state's low-cost service option after you approve the final proposal before funds are dispersed. So here's kind of a lightning round of yes or no. Do you commit to abiding by this provision of the law and publishing the low-cost service option so that customers know upfront what they will be paying?
Yes.
Great. Do you think that it is helpful for customers to know when their provider is going to change the price of their broadband subscriptions? Yes or no?
Yes.
Do you commit to allowing states to require subrecipients to tell the state and their customers they are changing the low-cost service option and what that new cost will be?
I agree with price transparency. I think that we also have to abide by our requirement, which is that we're not allowed, according to the law, to engage in rate regulation, and so.
But here's the problem. Under NTIA's BEAD restructuring policy, you are prohibiting states from setting the low-cost service option, and instead you've decided that ISPs should propose their own low-cost service option. Even though you stated numerous times during your confirmation hearing that you would follow the law, this appears to be a flagrant violation of the statute, which specifically requires the states to define and submit to NTIA for approval a low-cost service option that will apply to subrecipients. What authority do you have that authorizes you to ignore the plain statute?
We are not ignoring the statute. We are abiding by our requirement to ensure the timely and effective deployment of broadband projects. And we agree that affordability is important, and we are promoting affordability across our work streams. And one of those.
All right, then, Madam Administrator, under your new policy then, which again is in violation of the law that you swore to uphold, would it be acceptable for an ISP to charge $1,000 a month as the low-cost option? Yes or no?
Yeah, so I think that if you're an ISP, you want people on your network. And competition is the best regulator of prices.
Would you agree that they can say, we're going to charge $1,000 per month as the low-cost option?
I think that would be at odds with getting customers on their network. I also don't, if I could just respond, I think that it's also important to keep in mind data that we have. This is a very competitive, dynamic marketplace, especially with the entry of new competitors, including 2 satellite providers coming online. And the data just shows that.
And on that point, I wonder, it's widely known that fiber is more affordable. Now, I'll grant that Starlink in remote areas can be important for access, but overall, when you look at all the data, fiber has a lower monthly cost than Starlink. Starlink requires a lot of upfront equipment that's very expensive. So I wonder, has that gone, as you've sought to kind of restructure things and push Starlink and favor them, did you not take into account the affordability piece for consumers? And then here's my second.
The gentlelady's time has expired.
May I just respond to that?
Yes, ma'am.
So we require that that satellite providers in the program defray the upfront costs. They're required to provide customer premises equipment to providers free of charge. And we've also structured our rules to promote affordability and adoption, particularly through our states' milestone payments, structuring contracts that encourage providers to add consumers to their network, as well as.
The gentlelady's time has expired. Gentlelady yields. Chair recognizes the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Fry, for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having this hearing today, and thank you, Administrator, for being here. I'm going to talk about BEAD for a second. Administrator, I hear my colleagues on the other side of the aisle say that this administration is acting illegally with regard to BEAD, but we know that the last administration failed to follow that statute. Can you tell us the ways in which the last administration did not follow BEAD as written, and what ways are you correcting that?
Thank you for your question, and thank you for meeting with me earlier this year. Abiding by the law is of utmost importance to us. Under the previous administration, we saw red tape and hostile mandates that drove away participation from the program, raising costs. Another way that we saw, a departure from the law that was written by Congress was through an extreme technology mandate that was forced on the states that didn't take into account the way that the law was written. The law set out performance requirements. Each provider, no exceptions, must meet those performance requirements to participate under BEAD. There are only excellent broadband options in our program, no inferior services. Every provider must meet the requirements in the law, and there are no exceptions to that. And by course correcting our approach in that way, we were able to not only save $21 billion, but we were able to ensure universal broadband availability. And there was a significant risk identified by the OIG in 2025 that under the previous unlawful approach, certain states would have run out of money. I think everyone can agree that that would have been a bad outcome.
Thank you for that. I'm going to switch gears real quick. We've got a World Radio Conference coming up next year in Shanghai, China. China will undoubtedly try to undermine U.S. position and flood the zone with their proxies. I think a lot is at stake in our technology race with the CCP at the World Radio Conference, particularly our leadership in 6 gigahertz band and the growth of our unlicensed Wi-Fi ecosystem that is really the envy of the world. Almost 100 countries have followed the United States' lead in making all or a portion of their 6 gigahertz band available for unlicensed use. What steps is NTIA taking to protect the success of our approach and encourage additional countries to adopt unlicensed use in 6 gigahertz at the World Radio Conference?
Ensuring that we lead the world at the 2027 WRC is front and center to our agenda. And as you identified, one of our priorities is protecting the American position when it comes to the 6 gigahertz band. That's an area that China has identified for its approach to 6G and ensuring that we promote our strategic interest when it comes to 6G is very important. And one of the ways we can do that is by building a coalition of support around alternative bands, and we're working actively to identify bands for Agenda Item 1.7, which is the agenda item that covers that's going to cover next generation 6G bands. I think it's also, tying back to your first question, I think it's also very, important to recognize that the agenda is going to be very satellite focused. And one of the things that we've tried to do at NTIA is ensure that our domestic policies and international policies are working in concert. And one of the, I think, the real drawbacks to the previous tech bias approach was that it sends a message to the rest of the world at a time when we're actively promoting our leadership in commercial space to the rest of the world, and where it's so strategically important. It sends a very counterproductive message that these certain technologies are technologies where we lead or inferior, especially when the actual data shows that not to be the case.
Switching gears again, what is NTIA doing? What steps is it taking to maintain U.S. competitiveness in 5G and future development of 6G? I wasn't in here for some of this, so you may have already covered it, but other nations are obviously aggressively pursuing leadership in that, and so what are we doing ourselves to maintain that competitive edge?
The most important way to do that is increasing access to spectrum. We're aggressively identified 500 megahertz under our requirements under the Working Families Tax Cut Act. And then the other component that I would focus on is our participation in international standards and ensuring that international standards reflect our priorities for 6G.
Thank you, Administrator. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Kelly, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you to Chair Hudson and Ranking Member Matsui for holding this morning's hearing, and thank you, Administrator Roth, for being here. Your testimony reports that 56 states and territories have approved BEAD final proposals. Illinois is one of the 2 left out. The state submitted its proposal in September 2025, revised it by early April 2026, and built a plan that connects every eligible location in the state, nearly 157,000 in total, and more than 135,000 of them in rural or underserved areas. It does this on budget while leveraging over $575 million in private funding. Then on May 26 this year, NTIA told the state that approval depends on cutting another $100 million from deployment and denied Illinois a short extension before today's deadline with no stated reason beyond supposed cost savings. I know these are just numbers on a press release to you, but to me, these are households that will lose out on more reliable broadband that will be cheaper for us all in the long run. In my district, that cut runs over $2.2 million, money set aside to connect homes and farms with no service today. Illinois did the work, and I want to know why it is still waiting. They met every standard, met every standard your own testimony praises, and will NTIA approve its final proposal, and by what date?
Yeah, we have communicated changes to Illinois that we need to see. Illinois' proposal that was submitted to us just didn't meet the mark in terms of finding efficiencies and meeting the principles and the benefit of the bargain reforms. But we remain eager to get Illinois across the finish line, and we're working with the state to ensure that happens. We're looking to the totality of the circumstances, and we look forward. The ball's currently in Illinois' court, and we look forward to seeing their revised proposal.
I hope that is true, because they met every standard your own testimony praises. Can you assure this committee that LEO satellite providers receiving BEAD funds will be held to the same speed and service standards as every other technology receiving BEAD funding?
Absolutely. In administering the BEAD program, our focus has been on ensuring that we abide by the same performance requirements for every technology and every provider participating in the program. Congress established fair rules for participation, and our role is to allow innovators to compete, especially when the government just doesn't have a great track record for predicting the course of technology, and this field is just so dynamic. We judge technologies according to objective performance standards rather than government preferences, and the result has been better outcomes for consumers and deployment on a more expeditious basis.
Okay, thank you. No more questions. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Indiana, Ms. Houchin, for her 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Administrator Roth, welcome. It's great to see you. I want to spend my time on a couple of things that matter enormously to families and communities that I represent, and one in particular that I think matters to parents across the country, and that is protecting kids in a digital world. And I also want to talk about expanding broad access to broadband. And the NTIA sits at the center of both of those. I want to thank you for your work on screen time recommendations that you've worked on in a past role. But Administrator Roth, empowering parents over their children's technology is one of my top priorities as a member of this committee. What role can the NTIA play in addressing this very important issue?
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Houchin, and it was great to meet with you to discuss this issue, and thank you for your leadership on the issue of children's online protection. I know an issue that you've is very near and dear to your heart and that you have tremendous expertise on. I think NTIA this is something that is near dear to my heart as well as a mother of 6. I can tell you that when I speak to parents across the country, I think there's a feeling that they have little visibility, particularly into their children's screen time, particularly during the school day. And at the same time, there's this growing body of evidence that suggests that we've digitized classrooms faster than we've evaluated educational consequences, and ensuring that that federal policy reflects positive educational outcomes for children is very important. One book that I recently read on this issue is The Digital Delusion by Dr. Jared Cooney-Horvath, a neuroscientist who really shows that screen-based instruction can undermine learning, including memory, retention, comprehension. And so we need to grapple with this data. And one way we've done that is by hosting listening sessions on this topic.
And that brings me to my question. My note that you recently held a listening session on excessive screen time use, and you heard from parents and researchers during that session. I think you've alluded that there were concerns that were extended beyond simply cell phone time and limiting cell phones in schools. You identified some broader issues with the classroom educational technology itself, a concern that I share, the laptops, the devices, the digital curricula that are in front of kids much of the school day. Where do you go from here, from the listening session, and how can Congress be helpful?
Thank you. So as you know, there's addressing parental empowerment is a priority across this administration. HHS is active on this. So is the FCC. They're currently reviewing a program called E-Rate. And I think this is an example of where we've all seen that well-intended programs can potentially create unintended consequences, and it's important to ensure that federal programs operate in the interest of children and support healthy outcomes, not just focused on pushing money out the door. And so one of the ways that we're building on our previous convening is we're hosting an additional listening session really focused on ensuring that those voices that we want to see in this proceeding, parents, teachers, researchers, students, really are able to contribute, because sometimes when it comes to federal policymaking, agency proceedings don't always enable those stakeholders to contribute their voices. They can be dominated by more corporate interests.
I want to turn to broadband. I have about a minute left. Where we're talking about deployment times and permitting, how is the NTIA working with states to improve transparency and predictability with local permitting? Are you encouraging best practices like consolidated applications or shot clocks to keep projects on track?
Yes, we are working with the states on all different types of ways to expedite permitting at the state and local level, including roundtables, single points of contact, elevating issues to NTIA when there's a challenge that providers or states are facing. And so we have been working closely with the states, including on, as you said, expediting timelines so that we can have expeditious deployment in the BEAD program.
And in my remaining 20 seconds, several states, Kentucky, North Carolina, Ohio, and Texas, have established pole replacement funds to address the high cost of replacement. Does the NTIA view these state-led initiatives as useful models for breaking down pole barriers within the BEAD program?
Certainly, I think addressing access to poles, as we've discussed, is critically important, and it's something that we're certainly looking at as one of the proposals for the remaining BEAD funding.
Thank you so much. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Menendez, for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Chairman. Administrator Roth, thank you for being here today. Your agency is responsible for implementing a once-in-a-generation broadband investment known as the BEAD program, which would connect American families and small businesses to reliable and affordable internet. You testified at your Senate confirmation hearing on March 27, 2025, and you responded to questions for the record from that hearing as part of your confirmation process. Is that correct?
Yes.
You were asked whether New Jersey would keep its full BEAD funding of more than $260 million, to which you answered, quote, "If confirmed, I will work to release allocated funds to the states consistent with NTIA's statutory authority." Is that correct?
Yes.
But your agency is now calling more than $200 million in New Jersey's approved BEAD funding, quote, savings. Administrator Roth, yes or no, will New Jersey receive the full $260 million in BEAD funding that NTIA allocated?
Yes, we will abide by the law, which allocates funding to each state according to a formula.
So, because what you're communicating publicly is that there have been savings, but you're also telling me that New Jersey will get the full $260 million. And I just want to make sure that, because that seems to be a disconnect between what would be savings, but if we're getting the full 260, there's not really a savings.
Sorry, can you repeat your question?
You're saying there's $200 million in, quote, savings, but you just told me that New Jersey will get the full $260 million. That seems to be inconsistent.
No, as I said, we are operating that under the we're proceeding with the assumption that every state will be able to get access to their remaining funds. We're very proud of the savings that we were able to achieve in the program, thanks to our benefit of the bargain reforms, and we are working to ensure that that savings can be used in an effective manner.
And you would agree that there's a difference between savings and the illegal impoundment of millions of dollars appropriated by Congress?
Yes, no, we are not impounding any money.
Okay. You also told Congress you would follow the law and release all BEAD funding to the states, which would include funding for broadband adoption. But for months, your agency has kept states waiting for the broadband guidance they need to submit full BEAD plans, forcing them to submit proposals that don't include non-deployment funding. Originally, the first deadline, I believe, was March 11, 2026, but that deadline passed. Is that correct? For non-deployment guidance.
We have not issued the guidance yet, but we're working on it.
And then Secretary Ludden testified to Congress at the end of April that it would be released in the next 2 months. That has not happened. You're saying this summer, and you also, I believe, testified earlier that you want to get the guidance right. Is that correct?
Yeah, certainly getting the guidance right is critical. Rushing it out the door without careful planning would be irresponsible.
Can you share what the remaining items are that need to be resolved before the guidance can be issued?
You know, I can't speak to our internal deliberations and work product, but we are working actively to complete our work on the guidance. As you know, there was an unprecedented amount of interest and ideas floated as to how the funding should be used. And we need to do our due diligence to ensure that the guidelines are effective and outcome-driven in the same way that the...
At some point, right, the criticism of the last administration could be the same criticism levied against this administration, which is at some point we need to go, right? And there have been multiple deadlines, self-imposed deadlines that now have passed, and states are looking for this guidance because the law says that each state can submit only one final BEAD plan for that state's full broadband funding to help people get online, yet NTIA isn't enabling states to develop full BEAD plans or allowing them to spend their entire broadband allocation upon final review. So I'm curious how that is consistent with the law.
Now, we have a duty to conduct oversight of the BEAD program. Just to give you an example, there were a few examples during the previous administration where I think that NTIA's oversight was not adequate. Like, for example, there was one project approved at $228,391 per location.
But you've also criticized the last administration for red tape and hostile mandates. So they were not doing a good job of administering the program, but then they were also, making it harder for the program to be administered. And I'm really focused on what we do going forward, because what we spend a lot of our time here, unfortunately, is going back and forth between prior administrations. And my focus is on what we're doing now, and we need to go because I represent a densely populated area. There are people that represent rural areas. We need connectivity, and we need to have an assurance that states like New Jersey will get the full $260 million so we can start getting to work. I look forward to continuing to work with you, and I thank you for your time. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The chair now recognizes a gentlewoman from Virginia, Ms. McClellan, for her 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Director Roth. Congress created the BEAD program to ensure every American has access to reliable, affordable, high-speed internet. And in Virginia alone, over 133,000 homes and businesses are expected to be connected through this historic investment. Every day these projects are delayed, however, is another day that families can't access telehealth, students struggle to complete homework, small businesses can't compete, and public safety agencies remain without the connectivity that they need. Administrator Roth, it's now been more than 100 days since NTIA's self-imposed deadline to issue updated guidance on allowable uses of non-deployment BEAD funding. And at that same time, uncertainty throughout the economy has made planning broadband projects even more challenging for states and providers. So I have a number of questions, and in the interest of time, I'm going to ask yes or no questions. If you think you need more than a yes or no, just say it's not a yes or no, and I'll come back to it if I have time. So first, do you agree that the sections of the country that still need to be connected are among the most expensive to connect?
Yes.
Do you agree that every month BEAD deployment is delayed means millions more Americans remain without access to broadband for longer?
Yes, and we have worked on expediting build-out.
I'm going to come back to that. I just want to set a baseline. Do you agree that prolonged uncertainty may make it harder for states and broadband providers to plan and execute projects?
Yes.
Do you agree that states and localities know their communities best and should have a say in how they develop and deploy broadband networks?
Yes, and that's precisely why we empowered the states to determine which technology would work best pursuant to the law.
Thanks. Do you agree that states need clear guidance from the NTIA to move forward?
Yes.
Can you commit that NTIA will provide states with timely guidance so they can continue deploying broadband without unnecessary delays?
Yes.
Can you commit that NTIA will work with states to resolve implementation questions as quickly as possible rather than allowing projects to sit idle?
Yes, expediting the deployment of projects is front and center in our oversight of BEAD.
And can you assure me that the OMB proceeding on grant administration is not an effort to claw back non-deployment funds?
I am not familiar. No, I do not. We are operating under the assumption that states will be able to use their non-deployment funds.
Okay. So I want to thank you for that, because Congress created this historic investment to connect everyone with affordable, reliable, high-speed internet service. And as we both agreed, this funding is necessary because the locations left unconnected are among the most expensive to connect, and NTIA plays a critical role in connecting them. I want to turn to broadband mapping. Now, I know there's been a lot of discussion around why it took BEAD so long, but would you agree that the first step was we needed to know where current networks were deployed so we didn't overbuild?
Yes, absolutely.
So that mapping project was critically important to the success of BEAD.
Yes.
And Virginia invested significant time and resources in validating the broadband coverage area, and I know a number of states did, and some it was harder than others. How is NTIA ensuring that state-identified corrections are incorporated quickly so that BEAD dollars reach the communities that remain unserved rather than overbuilding?
So as you said, we followed the FCC maps and ran a challenge process, which was critical to preventing overbuilding in the BEAD program. And we continue to work with the FCC on ways to ensure that the maps reflect the reality on the ground. That was evident also in our work to conduct oversight over DC's broadband proposal, which would have directed BEAD funding to locations that either weren't broadband serviceable or already had broadband. So, conducting oversight and really drilling down into proposals and asking questions is really critical to ensuring that taxpayer dollars are used effectively.
Okay. Now, during your Senate confirmation hearing, you testified that you would abide by the law in implementing the Digital Equity Act. If the federal courts uphold that statute, including the provisions identifying covered populations, such as individuals who are members of racial or ethnic minority groups, will you commit to implementing the law consistent with both the court's decision and Congress's intent?
Yes.
All right, with that, I yield back and I thank you.
The gentlelady yields. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Carter, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary Roth, for enduring this long hearing. Appreciate it. You're almost there, so hang in there. Secretary, I have the honor and privilege of representing the state of Georgia, the coast of Georgia, over 100 miles of pristine coastline, beautiful area. But I'm very proud of my state. We received $1.3 billion in BEAD funds, and that was obviously to help us in the unserved and underserved communities. I don't know how familiar you are with Georgia, if at all, but there really are two Georgias. There's Atlanta and everywhere else, and I represent everywhere else. And South Georgia really does need this. We need broadband, and we need it to be extended there. Two of the major drivers of broadband deployment are permitting reform and then the access to spectrum. I sponsored a piece of legislation, the American Broadband Deployment Act. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, and I applaud you on your leadership to address permitting through congressional oversight.
Okay. How would the permitting reform contemplated by my American Broadband Deployment Act help with the BEAD program?
So permitting is certainly something that we've really thought creatively on addressing in our reforms to the BEAD program. We've as you know, we've focused both on state barriers, federal barriers, which can be a little bit easier to address for us. State and local barriers can be a little bit more challenging. We've worked with the states to streamline processing and expedite permitting timelines, as well as minimize permitting costs, really with the goal of ensuring that BEAD projects are successful and aren't subject to defaults. But we would welcome further assistance from Congress on this effort, as it is so challenging.
Well, as you know, we passed it out of subcommittee and committee, and it went to the floor. It was scheduled to be voted on. Unfortunately, we had to pull it at the last minute because we did get some opposition, particularly to the shot clocks. Are you familiar with that part of it as well?
Yes.
Okay. Any opinion on that? I mean, I had a lot of feedback from local officials. And listen, I was a mayor in another life, and I get it. I never liked the federal government or the state government telling me what I was supposed to be doing. But at the same time, that has proven, I think, to be a problem and a hurdle that a lot of the companies are trying to get past. So any opinion on that?
Yes, no, I think I applaud your leadership. I think that often you see that opposition to efforts like that can be not necessarily consistent with the goals of BEAD. The goals of BEAD are universal broadband deployment. We've really tried to address overhead costs that not only make permitting slower, but also add costs to companies. So I think addressing permitting is also an important way to address some of the affordability challenges that members on the committee have identified. Sometimes you see localities treating some of these projects like a piggy bank, and that's counterproductive, I think, to getting better connectivity in some of these places.
What has NTIA done to encourage state and local governments to streamline their permitting processes and in order to expedite deployment for BEAD?
We have terms and conditions in the BEAD program that are critical to preventing defaults and promoting the effective deployment of projects. And those requirements focus on a 90-day approval timeline, minimizing costs, and really working together to address local barriers, including access to polls. And we're working with the states to implement those requirements. But we would appreciate the opportunity to work with Congress as we address these challenges.
Well, let me ask you this, just an open-ended question. How should we in Congress structure this to make it permitting reform to make sure that spectrum policy translates into real broadband deployment? Because that's what this is for, as you well know. We want to have deployment.
Absolutely, and I welcome the opportunity to work with you and on this really critical issue that's not only important for better connectivity and better broadband affordability, but also our national leadership when it comes to next generation technologies. We certainly don't want an inhospitable permitting environment to result in American technology being left behind.
Great. Well, thank you very much again for being here and appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Tonko, for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome, Assistant Secretary Roth. This hearing is long overdue, and over the past year, it has been deeply disappointing to watch the NTIA's implementation of the BEAD program. I've worked for years to expand broadband access throughout New York's capital region and across the country. I'm concerned that this administration's actions are putting our goal of universal, reliable, and accessible and affordable broadband at risk. So, Secretary Roth, you mentioned in your testimony that NTIA is focused on returning the BEAD program to its statutory objective, and in your confirmation hearing, you stated you would follow the law. Yet NTIA is now prohibiting states from setting the low-cost service option as the law requires, and instead you have decided that service providers have the sole discretion to propose their own low-cost service option. If your goal is to faithfully implement the statute, Can you explain what authority you have to ignore that statutory language?
The low-cost service option remains a statutory requirement. It remains in place. What we have done is we have made clear that rate regulation, according to the law, is prohibited. That's how Congress wrote the law, and our job is to implement the law. I think a bipartisan Congress, recognize that that rate regulation drives up costs and undermines participation in the program. We saw that from the history of the BEAD program, and we've really restored the program to its statutory mission. But I agree that affordability is important, and there are many levers that we've pulled in order to promote affordability, particularly through expanding, clearing the runway for innovation, expanding access to spectrum, and minimizing permitting costs, which are actually more effective in promoting broadband affordability.
Reclaiming my time here, again, I'm concerned about ignoring the statutory language. So is it your view that a statutory condition that applies only to providers voluntarily accepting federal grant funds is really the same as regulating rates in the broader marketplace?
The low-cost service option remains a legal requirement. I mean, it's up to the states to enforce its contracts with providers, but NTIA is prohibited by the law from regulating or setting rates.
In your testimony, you also claim to be aiming for universal connectivity. How can you make that claim if there are households that cannot afford to subscribe?
I agree that affordability is incredibly important, and we've structured the BEAD program in a manner that I think promotes affordability in a much better manner than previously, including by promoting competition and not scaring away participation. One of the trends that we've seen in the last years is actually that broadband prices are coming down, and real prices adjusted for inflation have come down more than 7% per year between 2020 and 2026. That's thanks to a competitive facilities-based competition environment. We want to promote that environment, and part of the way that we did that was by ensuring that we took a technology-neutral approach to the program as Congress intended, while ensuring that each project meets the standards of priority broadband service.
Yeah, I still see it as walking away from the statutory language and not really regulating rates in the broader marketplace. Now, to make matters worse, NTIA went beyond non-enforcement of the law's low-cost provision. With Term 50 of the BEAD General Terms and Conditions, NTIA is attempting to preempt state laws like New York's Affordable Broadband Act that requires providers operating in New York to offer specific low-cost options for qualifying households. Despite this, I'm proud that New York has remained committed to enforcing its Affordable Broadband Act to ensure low-income households have access to affordable internet service. Interestingly, just days after New York Governor Hochul announced that New York's BEAD program would move forward alongside the Affordable Broad Act, NTI began circulating this document, BEAD Subgrantees Protect Your Rights. I ask, Mr. Chair, that for unanimous consent to enter this guidance into the record.
Without objection.
Now, this document advises BEAD subgrantees that they should raise concerns directly with NTIA if they believe state-imposed requirements conflict with federal BEAD conditions, including those related to cost. Did you approve the release of this document? Were there any outside organizations involved in any part of this production?
Ensuring that rate regulation is not hampering BEAD projects and undermining the timely and effective deployment of BEAD projects is part of our statutory responsibility. And we think that this guidance is critical to ensuring the success of the BEAD program.
And what about the outside organizations involved?
Gentleman's time has expired.
No, we have our rules apply the law. And there are lots of outside organizations recently, that have published ample data showing the significant negative costs of rate regulation on the deployment of broadband projects. So if we have the statutory responsibility to ensure timely and effective deployment of broadband projects, it's critical that projects are not put at risk.
The gentleman's time has expired.
Mr. Chair, I have other questions that I'll get to the subcommittee to have answered by the Assistant Secretary. Thank you. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Dr. Joyce, for his 5 minutes of question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Matsui, for holding this important hearing. And thank you to Secretary Roth for being here with us. As I've said before, and I will say again, rural communities cannot be left behind as technology develops at such a rapid pace. This includes broadband infrastructure. And thanks to the work that's being done at NTIA, we are closer to connecting every rural community in America, closer than we've ever been before. Under President Trump and your leadership, BEAD program reform under NTIA has led to less red tape and more connections. Streamlining the program and accelerating deployment, that's what matters. It matters to my constituents. It matters in getting rural communities the connectivity that they deserve. In the district that I represent in Pennsylvania, connection sometimes at best can be spotty. Geographic challenges like mountains create real-life barriers when it comes to connectivity. My constituents rely on broadband power precision. Agriculture is part of that. Telehealth is part of that. Education is part of that. And my constituents desperately need that. This Congress, I introduced the Broadband and Telecommunications Rail Act with my colleague from California, Mr. Peters, and my colleague from Ohio, Mr. Landsman, to provide a necessary and reasonable framework to allow broadband deployment along railroad rights-of-way. This bill prioritizes safety and efficiency, and I look forward to continuing my work in Congress to increase broadband coverage in rural communities without burdensome red tape and unnecessary delays. Placing our rural communities at the center of our work to deploy broadband is essential to ensuring that universal broadband availability is there for all Americans. Administrator Roth, in your written testimony, you mentioned that you are focused on ensuring universal broadband availability. Would you please describe how the benefit of the bargain can achieve this and how this is critical reform that is so necessary and will ultimately benefit rural communities?
Thank you, Congressman Joyce, and it was a real pleasure to meet with you a few months ago. BEAD's mission is clear. It's to close broadband gaps, and that's been our central focus. One of the ways that we did that was by removing red tape, which increased participation in the program across all technologies. I think that, our role is to implement the law and not add extraneous mandates that divert from the goal of universal broadband access. In applying the law, we've also been clear that government set the benchmarks in the law for what defines a priority broadband service, and it's up to each technology and provider to prove to each state that they could meet those requirements. But it wasn't, there was no technology preference in the law, and it also doesn't reflect the current state of technology to freeze technology in place. As a result of our eliminating these burdens and getting our program in line with congressional language, we were able to see not just increased participation, but universal broadband availability. Every last community connected, whereas there was a real risk under the previous rules that overspending would cause some communities to be left behind, and we can all agree that that would have been a bad outcome. And each technology in the program, each provider needs to play by our rules. They need to meet the performance requirements in the law, but it's up to each state to determine what technologies work for different areas, not for Washington to impose and shove down their throats a one-size-fits-all solution.
In light of the BEAD reforms that you have been overseeing at NTIA, under these reforms and your leadership during the past year, would you please speak about how broadband deployment has been accelerated across the country from state proposal submissions to funds being released? Talk to us about the timeline and how you have expedited that.
Yeah, so just in 1 year from our release of our restructuring notice, we've already seen deployments in several states. One of those states was Nebraska. I visited Ogallala, Nebraska, to witness one of the first BEAD projects, and one of the things that was so significant was that the project was delivering gigabit service to the community through a fixed wireless service, unlicensed fixed wireless, that was precluded from even participating during the previous administration. I think that goes to show the importance of letting the market and market innovators work rather than putting our thumb on the scale on a single technology, especially when that technology was able to deliver such high quality service to the community in such an expeditious manner. I think consumers, and speaking to the Deb Armconnect, the American who got the service through that technology, she was so thrilled. She didn't care how she was getting her broadband service. She just wanted it to work. And
The gentleman's time has expired.
Oh. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Balderson, for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Secretary, thank you for being here today, and I'm the last one, so I think you're done. Since the administration issued this updated BEAD guidance last year, states have moved much more quickly through the approval process. Based on what NTIA has learned from working with states and providers, what additional improvements do you think could help accelerate broadband deployment and encourage even greater participation from rural providers?
So I think that one of the things that we focused on at NTIA has been really clearing the path to innovation. We've seen, thanks to our histories, facilities-based intermodal history of competition, that that competition has been the most effective way, not just of promoting better access to communications, but really innovating in a manner that helps rural America. As I've said, some of the biggest, this most significant progress that we've seen in connecting rural Americans haven't come from subsidies, they've come from innovation itself. And so what NTIA can do is pull certain levers to promote that. One of the best ways we can do that is by expanding access to spectrum, which we're currently doing through our mandate under the Working Families Tax Cut Act. And another way that we're doing that is by, trying to address overhead costs. I think any efforts that we can take to address permitting obstacles are really helpful in increasing broadband deployment as well as innovation.
Okay, thank you very much. In the congressional district that I represent, electric co-ops are a major source of essential services, and many are working to expand broadband access in rural communities. We've heard that certain BEAD requirements may affect their longstanding statutory frameworks and financial models. Could you share how NTIA is approaching these concerns and what flexibility might exist to ensure cooperatives can participate successfully in the program?
Thank you for your question. So just in line with that goal of expediting and increasing broadband deployment, the law requires that we issue rules governing the program to ensure that BEAD projects are deployed in a timely and effective manner. And one of the things that we've learned from history and broadband programs past, like the RDOF, is that pole access can be one of the most challenging areas that can affect the timely and effective deployment of broadband projects. And especially as you've seen pole owners enter broadband markets, their incentives may not always be aligned with the goals of the BEAD program. So what we've done in our rules is ensure that there is a cop on the beat. That to the extent that there is a gap in regulation of timely access to poles, in order to serve that goal of timely and effective deployment of broadband projects. And to the extent that there are pole owners that don't want to participate in the program, we have a process in place to ensure that every last area is served, and if necessary, we can use a different provider.
Okay, thank you. Follow up on that. As states move from planning into construction, what role does NTIA see itself playing in helping states resolve implementation challenges that arise from provider feedback,
particularly from smaller broadband companies, electric cooperatives, and local fiber providers.
One of the things that we really pride ourselves on is ensuring that we are overseeing the program actively and seeing what challenges providers are facing. We wanted to see, we've seen a diverse mix of providers in the program, and I think that was thanks to our rules that really refocus the program on its core mission. When it comes to smaller providers, one of the things that we've focused on is monitoring the fiber supply chain, and which is something that we know that some providers are concerned about, but we are grateful that major fiber producers have made promises that BEAD providers will get their supply on time. And I think additionally, really focusing on working with states on permitting obstacles through things like permitting roundtables, single points of contact, elevating challenges to NTIA is another way that we're really working to ensure effective and expeditious deployment.
Okay, thank you very much.
The gentleman yields. Seeing there is no further members wishing to be recognized, I would like to thank our witness for being here today. I remind members that they have 10 business days to submit questions for the record, and I ask the witness to respond to the questions promptly. Members should submit their questions by the close of business on July 15, 2026. Without objection, the subcommittee is adjourned.
Good job.